Hi guys, tonight we ease ourselves into the kind of storm that swallows entire horizons and makes even the bravest traveller wonder what in the world they are doing outside. You stand there, or rather you sway there because the wind keeps shoving you sideways. It is so loud that it feels like the blizzard itself is screaming into your ears, a white curtain pulled across everything you thought you knew about the West. You can barely see your own hands. Your breath freezes on your eyelashes, and somewhere inside you a small voice whispers that, honestly, you probably will not survive this if you keep wandering around without shelter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want to help me set the mood, let me know where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, and you begin to follow the faint outline of a trail disappearing beneath swirling snow, searching for anything that might keep you alive long enough to sleep. The air bites the tips of your fingers. Your boots crunch through drifts that rise nearly to your knees. Every step feels like pushing through wet cement, only colder and far less friendly. You tilt your head toward the sky, though there's no real sky to be seen. Storms on the frontier were not gentle events. They were enormous weather engines that rolled down from the Rockies or swept across the plains with so much energy that newspapers of the time sometimes described them as living creatures. There is a mainstream historical fact for you. Pioneer diaries often called them blue northers or white hurricanes. Your mind drifts to a quirky little tidbit you once read about some travellers insisted they could smell a blizzard coming. They claimed the air took on a metallic scent, almost like a struck match mixed with frozen grass. Whether anyone can truly smell a storm is up for debate, but in moments like this you tell yourself you can almost detect that sharpness too. You stumble again, and for a moment you crouch low, blinking the snow from your eyes. The drifts whirl around you like loose feathers. Some people in the 1800s wrapped scarves around their faces and then covered the scarf with a second cloth soaked in animal fat, believing the grease would block frostbite. Historians still argue whether this actually worked, or if it simply made the cloth freeze faster. You suppose either answer would feel annoying to learn right now, as you fight the storm with nothing but your hands and the determination to keep moving. A faint rumble shakes beneath your feet, though it might simply be the wind forcing the ground to vibrate. On the plains, blizzards were notorious for disorienting both pioneers and livestock. Cattle could wander miles off the course following the sound of their own fear. Horses sometimes refused to walk, sensing danger you could not yet see. And here you are, just a single human shape in a world that suddenly seems to have no depth at all. The cold begins to numb the ridge of your jaw. You tighten your coat and bend forward, imagining what settlers often did during such storms. Many would huddle behind their wagons, using the vehicles as makeshift windbreaks, while others dug down into the snow itself. You think of those families travelling west with all their belongings rattling inside wooden trunks. They face storms without modern gear, without insulated boots, without reliable forecasts. It borders on unbelievable that entire wagon trains walked into this sort of weather, armed with little more than wool leather and sheer stubbornness. Your path begins to dip downward. That is promising, because settlers often memorized the land well enough to know that shallow dips sometimes led to creeks or coulees. In a blizzard, these natural features could provide limited shelter. You shove a glove against your face, feeling the cold fabric scraping your cheek as you try to peer ahead. The wind hisses as if trying to warn you that the night is still young and very much in charge. A strange quiet fills your ears for a moment, and you remember a frontier belief that if you stood still long enough inside a blizzard, you could hear distant voices. People used to claim they heard songs, whistles, or even conversations carried from miles away. Scientists today chalk this up to the way snow absorbs and muffles sound, creating pockets of silence that feel eerie and amplified. Still, the idea that a storm might whisper to you fits uncomfortably well with the mood surrounding you. Your legs ache from the effort of wading forward. You curl your toes inside your boots, trying to coax warmth back into them. Back on the frontier, newspapers sometimes urged travellers to keep moving during storms because stopping even briefly could cause deadly drowsiness. There were countless stories of people who sat down just to rest for a moment and never woke up. That is why you force yourself to keep stepping one uncertain foot at a time. The trail grows steeper now. Snow stings your skin like thrown pebbles. Your breath comes out in a thin, ghostly cloud. You have no idea how long you've been walking. Minutes. Hours. Time becomes strange when the world around you has just two colours, white and darker white. Frontier letters describe this effect too, calling it snow delirium, the feeling that the world is shrinking toward a single glowing point. Your fingers brush something solid. A post. You pause. Travellers in the 1800s sometimes hammered guideposts into the ground, along commonly used cattle trails or homestead roads. These posts helped people navigate during storms. But they were also sparse and irregular, and many storms knock them aside. Yet here one stands, or seems to stand half buried. You lean your body against the wind, gripping the post as if it were a friend who has come to save you. The rough wood feels reassuring. You take a long, slow breath. Somewhere nearby there must be a fence line or a road, or maybe the shadow of a homestead hidden under swirling snow. You close your eyes, letting the wind push over you like a restless tide. Somewhere behind the roar there is the faint hope of a wall, or a doorway, or any place where you can lie down without feeling the sky fall on top of you. Your next step may decide whether this night becomes a story of survival or something far bleaker. So you keep searching the pale fog ahead, hoping for the smallest sign of shelter, as the storm continues to swallow the world. You steady yourself against the guidepost for a moment longer, letting the wind roar around your shoulders like some furious animal that has just realised you're not giving up. When you finally push onward again, the world tilts into a softer slope, the snow drifting deeper in some places and rippling across the ground like shifting dunes. The blizzard blinds you, but your instincts pull you forward the way travellers in the 1800s often described feeling their way through storms more by memory and intuition than sight. You take short steps, testing every patch of ground, because you know a hidden creek bed or a sudden drop could be waiting beneath the powder. Your breath forms tiny crystals along the collar of your coat. You brush them away as you spot a faint shape ahead, or at least you think you do. The plains could play tricks on the eyes during a whiteout. People wrote in their diaries about seeing phantom barns or glowing windows or even the vague outline of trees that turned out to be nothing but wind-carved drifts. You blink into the swirling veil and imagine that maybe this shadow is real. Travellers on the plains developed a few unusual techniques for dealing with limited visibility. One mainstream historical detail that comes to mind is how scouts sometimes walked with a long pole held out in front of them. It was not for balance, it was to feel their way forward. If the pole suddenly swung downward, it signalled a drop-off. If it thunked against something, it meant shelter or danger. You wish you had one of those right now, though you would probably end up jabbing it straight into a snowbank and then apologising to it for the trouble. You take another step and notice something curious in the wind. A soft lowing sound, almost like a cow. For a moment you freeze. There is no reason a cow should be out here unless it is part of someone's herd or has wandered from a nearby homestead. On the frontier, hearing cattle during a storm was often a mixed blessing. On one hand, it meant humans were likely nearby. On the other hand, cattle had a frustrating habit of drifting away from settlements, during blizzards sometimes lured by the natural slope of the land or the instinct to follow the wind. Historians still argue whether cattle truly followed the wind or whether people simply imagined patterns in their unpredictable movements. You perk your ears anyway because even the chance of human life is worth following. You begin angling your steps toward the sound. It is faint, almost lost in the clamour of the storm, but it gives you a direction, something more concrete than the endlessly shifting white. The quirky tidbit floating to mind is how some pioneers claim they could judge distance by the way animal calls echoed off snow. Snow absorbed sound, so voices and animal noises seemed closer than they actually were. You keep that in mind as you trudge forward, refusing to get your hopes too high. The ground firms beneath your boots. Then unexpectedly it softens again. You glance downward. Drifts build up in unpredictable ways, especially where the land dips. The snow can pile waist-deep one moment and scatter thinly across frozen grass the next. It gives the ground an odd patchwork texture. Many travellers in the 1800s used this patchiness to tell where they were, since deeper snow tended to form along fence lines or next to wagon ruts. You lower yourself a little, brushing your glove across the surface, smooth in some places, ridged in others. Maybe the land has been shaped by something human. The storm gusts suddenly battering you with a burst of icy grit that forces you to crouch. The roar is so loud that it vibrates through your ribs. For a heartbeat, you have to close your eyes, letting the blizzard have its tantrum. You picture the scouts who once roamed this same path, people who tracked bison herds or guided wagon trains, sometimes navigating in storms even harsher than this. One well-known fact is that many of these scouts carried small talismans or good luck charms on their belts or tucked beneath their shirts. Some were carved bone pieces, others were small stones, or even bits of metal hammered into medallions. You imagine clutching one now, not because you believe it would help, but because the psychological comfort would be priceless. When you open your eyes again, the faint lowing sound repeats louder this time. You straighten, adjusting your direction. The shape ahead becomes slightly more defined, though still ghost-like. You picture a lone settler bundled in blankets inside a sod house, checking on their animals with a lantern. In storms like this, many settlers relied heavily on livestock for clues about the weather. Horses grew restless, dogs barked at shifts in wind pressure, and cattle sometimes huddled in tight groups. Observing them was a kind of frontier weather app long before satellites and radar. Your coat brushes against something stiff. A fence, not entirely intact, but present enough that you can trace it with your gloved hand. Wooden rails crusted with snow. A fence means a homestead, and a homestead means people, shelter, heat, possibly even a warm bed. You almost laugh at the thought, though your throat is too dry to make much sound. You follow the fence line, leaning into the wind. The blizzard tries to knock you off balance again, but you cling to the rails, feeling each one like a rung on a ladder. Snowflakes whip past your ears with a hiss, cold and sharp. You imagine settlers doing the same thing, pulling themselves hand over hand along a fence to reach a barn or house, when the storm reduced the world to nothing. Diaries from the era often mention how fences saved lives, especially during the sudden winter squalls that could blow in faster than anyone expected. You turn a corner around the fence and stop. Ahead of you rises a darker shape, thick and broad, a sod house, or something close enough to one. It has that unmistakable silhouette of walls built from earthgrass and roots, stacked into blocks like rough bricks. These structures were common in treeless regions of the plains, cheap to build and surprisingly warm. Settlers called them soddies, and they were said to smell like fresh soil after rain. You hope this one smells like safety. Your heart presses against your throat as you step closer. The wind slams against the sod walls and rattles the crude wooden door. You raise a hand, pounding against it with numb knuckles. Once, twice. The sound barely carries through the storm. Then the door creaks open. Warm air sweeps out, carrying the smell of smoke-wool blankets, and something vaguely sweet, maybe dried apples warming near a stove. A figure inside reaches for you, pulling you in quickly before the wind can steal the heat from the small room. The door slams shut behind you, and the storm's roar muffles, instantly replaced by the deep silence of a snug interior. You stand inside snow, melting down your coat, breath shaking with relief. Your eyes adjust to the low lamplight. A sod house, a real one. Rough earthen walls, packed dirt floor, quilts draped over a rope bed frame, a small iron stove giving off steady heat. You have found your first shelter of the night, and with it the first place you might actually sleep. Outside, the wind continues its furious voice, but in here you feel the warmth settle into your bones like an old friend finally arriving. The warmth inside the sod house settles into you slowly, almost shyly, as if the heat is unsure whether you deserve it after wandering so long in the storm. You stand near the doorway, letting your eyes adjust to the glow of a small whale oil lamp flickering on a wooden crate. The walls around you feel alive in an earthy way. Thick blocks of prairie sod cut from the ground months before form the shelter, their roots still tangled together like old fingers, gripping one another for support. This is where you learn what it means to sleep in a world made of earth and snow. Your host is an older settler wrapped in a patched wool coat. He nods at you, gestures toward the stove, and speaks only a few quiet words. Storm nights did not require much conversation. People understood the seriousness of blizzards on the plains. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your thoughts as you step closer to the stove. Many frontier families relied heavily on sod houses because lumber was scarce in large portions of the West. The nearest trees were often miles away, so settlers simply turned the land beneath their feet into shelter. Thick sod walls trapped heat so well that some families joked they lived inside a giant brick of summer soil. You kneel near the stove and hold your hands close to the iron surface. It radiates a steady, reassuring warmth. The smell of smoke curls through the room, blending with the scent of packed earth. It is not unpleasant. It feels grounding, like breathing inside a cave that has seen 1,000 years of storms. You remove your gloves, fingers trembling slightly as the blood returns. Your host moves around the room with slow, practiced ease, adding a small piece of dried cow chip to the fire. Yes, cow chip. There is your quirky tidbit. In treeless regions, settlers burned dried animal dung as fuel. It produced surprisingly little smoke, and it became one of the most important sources of heat during brutal winters. The room creaks softly as the wind pushes against the sod walls. You listen to the muffled moan of the storm outside, grateful for the thickness of the earthen barrier. People often wrote in their journals that sod houses seemed to swallow sound, turning the loudest blizzard into nothing more than a distant rumble. Historians still argue whether sod houses truly held heat better than log cabins, or if the settlers simply convinced themselves of it to feel braver. Whatever the truth, you can feel the temperature difference, and it is enough to keep your body alive. Your host hands you a blanket woven from coarse wool. You drape it around your shoulders, inhaling the faint scent of smoke that clings to it. Then he gestures toward a sleeping platform on the far side of the room. It is nothing more than a wooden frame topped with rope and covered with a straw tick and a couple of quilts. But to you it looks like an invitation from the universe itself. You approach it slowly, letting the heat soak into your muscles. The room itself is small. Many sod houses measured only 10 feet by 12 feet, sometimes even smaller. That meant the entire family cooked, slept, and lived in one compact space. You imagine nights here when storms blotted out the sky for days, forcing people to stay inside with nothing but cards, sewing, or storytelling to keep boredom away. Children probably whispered themselves to sleep, listening to the storm scratch at the rooftop. Adults likely took shifts tending the fire, afraid it might go out and leave them all shivering in the dark. You sit on the edge of the sleeping platform. The straw rustles under the quilts. The heat from the stove drifts toward you in slow waves. You can almost feel your heartbeat steadying. But before you lie down, you take a moment to appreciate the artistry hidden within such a simple structure. Sod houses required precise cutting. Settlers used special spades to slice the ground into thick bricks of earth, each about 2 feet long. These bricks were stacked in overlapping rows, creating walls sometimes more than 2 feet thick. Roofs were made from whatever wood could be found, often cottonwood or willow branches, then topped with more sod. The result was a house that felt part of the land itself. Your host sits near the stove, poking at the fire with a metal rod. A pot of something warm simmers on top, maybe beans or dried vegetables. He offers you a small tin cup. The taste is mild but soothing, the kind of food that feels like it strengthens you without demanding any energy in return. You sip slowly, letting the warmth travel down into your chest. A quiet hum fills the room as the storm presses against the sod walls. Every so often the wind whistles through tiny cracks. You pull the quilts over your legs, adjusting your position until the bed feels almost comfortable. Straw mattresses were known to be lumpy, but settlers often added extra ticking or old clothing beneath the quilts to soften them. You sense a few bumps here and there, but nothing that stops you from wanting to lie down. You stretch out carefully, your limbs relaxing as the heat settles around you. You think again of the travellers who never reached a house like this. People sometimes froze within sight of shelter, unable to recognise it in the blinding white. Others collapsed in snowdrifts only a few yards from their doorsteps. That knowledge makes the soft quilt feel sacred. Your host dims the lamp. The room descends into a warm twilight. The stove glows faintly, the red coals visible through a small iron grate. The smell of earth deepens as the moisture from melting snow evaporates. You turn your head, listening to the soft scratch of wind along the sod where grass roots still cling. It feels like the land itself is whispering old stories from before settlers arrived. You think about the families who built these homes together. Men cutting sod blocks in steady rhythm. Women shaping the inside walls with a mixture of mud and water to reduce dust. Children patting the floor until it hardened like cement. Sod houses were rugged but full of heart. They protected people from wolves, wind and winter alike. When storms rolled across the plains, these humble structures often stood when wooden cabins fell apart. You curl deeper into the blankets, your mind drifting towards sleep. The stove pops softly. The room stays warm. Your host lies down on a nearby blanket, barely making a sound. For a few moments, you simply lie there, breathing in the quiet. The storm may rage outside, but in here you feel rooted to the earth, sheltered by walls that grew from the ground itself. And with that comfort surrounding you, you begin to slip into the rhythm of frontier sleep, the kind that comes not from ease, but from the sheer relief of having survived another day. The warmth from the sod house still clings to your clothes as you step back into the storm, guided by your host toward the outline of an old wagon sitting half buried beside the fence. The blizzard has eased only slightly, but you need to move on because the night ahead requires you to learn how people slept, not just in earthen homes, but in the rolling wooden lifeboats that carried families across the frontier. You pull your coat tighter as the wind claws at you again, and with careful steps you make your way toward the wagon bed that will become your shelter for the next part of this journey. The wagon looms like a frozen shipwreck. Its canvas covering droops under the weight of snow, the edges stiffened into icy folds. You climb the small wooden step and lift the canvas flap, then slip inside, where the wind cannot reach you so easily. At once the air feels warmer, or at least less violent, which in a place like this counts as comfort. The space is cramped, barely high enough to sit upright, but compared to the open storm it feels like safety. Travellers in the 1800s relied heavily on the covered wagon not just as transport but as a bedroom whenever storms caught them between settlements. One well-documented frontier reality comes to mind. Many families lined the interior with quilts, buffalo robes and spare clothing so that the wagon bed became a layered cocoon of textures. As you brush a hand along the inner canvas, you imagine how a mother or father would have arranged bedding each evening, smoothing wrinkles with cold fingers while their children shivered nearby. You crawl farther inside. The wagon creaks with each movement as if waking from a long sleep of its own. Snow presses softly against the canvas, dimming the light. Your breath curls into small ghosts in the air. You run your fingertips along a buffalo hide lying near the back. The fur is rough but plush, its warmth lingering even in this cold. People prize these hides for their insulating power. Families sometimes placed one beneath them and another above, creating a kind of frontier sandwich of heat. You pull one closer, grateful for the heaviness of it. As you settle into the wagon bed, your mind stirs with one of the stranger anecdotes from the trail. Some travellers claim that rubbing a bit of warm bacon grease on the canvas kept it more flexible in deep cold. Whether this worked is questionable, but you picture someone carefully smearing fat across the fabric in hope that the material would not crack. You smile faintly at the thought. The frontier encouraged creativity, even if that creativity sometimes made later generations puzzled. The wagon groans again as a gust of wind pushes against its side. You brace yourself, hands pressed into the wooden slats beneath the bedding. These slats were often just raw planks, and people sometimes stuffed grass or straw between them to block drafts. You dig your fingers into one of these cracks, feeling the softness of dried grass that must have been gathered before the first frost. The scent is faint but sweet, a small reminder of summer buried inside winter. You shift your weight, testing how the bedding settles. The wagon bed is irregular and noisy. Every move produces a creak or a rustle. You imagine a family lying here shoulder to shoulder, children tucked between adults for shared warmth. Letters from the era often describe how mothers place the youngest toward the middle since they lost heat fastest. You let that image sink in a line of bundled figures breathing in unison, while outside the storm tried to peel the canvas away. As the wagon rocks slightly, you think about one of the odd but charming trail customs. Some travellers hung bells inside their wagons during storms. They believed the gentle jingling would keep them alert enough to avoid drifting into dangerous half-sleep. There is no clear agreement among experts today about whether these bells offered any real benefit, or if they simply calmed people by giving them something rhythmic to listen to. Regardless, you can almost hear the imagined sound, a tiny chime inside a world buried in wind. Your body sinks deeper into the buffalo hide. You pull an old quilt across your chest. The stitching is uneven, likely done by hand in lamplight. Frontier quilts often told stories about the families that made them. Some used scraps from worn-out shirts or fragments from dresses that were once special. Others included bits of flour sacks dyed with homemade pigments from berries or bark. The quilt wrapped around you now feels like a timeline of someone's life sewn into warmth. The storm sighs above the canvas, brushing it like a giant hand. The wagon frame trembles but holds. Covered wagons were built for endurance. They crossed rivers, climbed rocky slopes, and endured storms that would have stripped the paint off lesser vehicles. Yet inside, people slept as best they could, listening to the groaning wood, and hoping the wheels stayed steady on the frozen ground. A cold draft snakes along your ankle, and you pull your legs closer to your body. You remember reading that some travellers heated small stones in their campfires before placing them inside the wagon under blankets. These stones glowed with warmth for hours, acting like frontier hot water bottles. You wish you had one now, though the buffalo hide does most of the work. You lie back, fully staring at the underside of the curved canvas above you. The light from outside filters through, faintly giving the illusion of dim lantern glow. You imagine your breath rising to touch that canvas, condensing and freezing in tiny flecks. In some old journals, travellers wrote about waking to see crystals of frost forming overhead, where their breathing had overnight turned the fabric white. You exhale slowly, watching for the faint sparkle of moisture. Your eyes begin to relax. The rocking of the wagon becomes soothing, almost like being in a small boat drifting on a frozen sea. You think about how often families had to sleep this way, not by choice, but necessity. Roads were long settlements, sparse, and storms unpredictable. A wagon bed became a bedroom, a sanctuary, and sometimes a final hope. Sleeping inside, one required trust that the canvas would hold, trust that the horses would stay calm, trust that morning would eventually arrive. Another thought nudges at you. Researchers today remain uncertain about how much sleep people on the trail truly manage during blizzards. Diaries mention restless nights, short dreams, or entire hours lost to shivering. It is likely they dozed in bursts, taking whatever fragments of rest they could. As you lie here, you sense that truth in your own body. The storm lulls you towards sleep, then jolts you back awake with every fresh gust. You tuck the quilt up to your chin. The wagon creaks. Snow hisses softly outside. The cold nips your nose, but the warmth trapped around your torso keeps you from discomfort. Gradually your breathing slows, falling into a rhythm that matches the faint sway of the wagon. This moment right here is what frontier sleep often looked like. Not perfect comfort, but determined rest carved out of whatever space people had. A shelter on wheels, a travelling bedroom, a fragile barrier between the softness of quilts and the fury of winter. You close your eyes, letting the darkness of the wagon cradle you. Tomorrow will bring a new shelter, a new kind of bed, a new battle with the cold. But for now, inside this snowy cocoon, you allow yourself to drift, carried by the same kind of peace that kept families alive during the harshest nights of the West. When morning finally nudges you awake inside the quiet cradle of the wagon, the storm outside has softened into a steady hush. You push the canvas flap aside and step into a world that looks carved from alabaster stone. The air still stings, but the worst violence of the blizzard has drifted away across the prairie. You make your way toward a distant shape marked by a thin plume of smoke, rising hesitantly into the pale sky. It is a trading post, the kind built from rough timber and stubborn hope, and it will become your next lesson in how people found sleep in the most unforgiving weather imaginable. The building stands low against the horizon. Thick logs notched and stacked by hand form walls that sag slightly from age and winter weight. The door rattles from the wind as you approach. Inside, dim light flickers from a pair of lanterns hanging on iron hooks. The smell is unmistakable. Wood smoke, fur, dried meat, and the slightly musky scent of tanned hides. Your boots thud against the floorboards as you enter, shaking off snow. A man behind the counter nods at you, his beard dusted with frost. He looks like he belongs to the room, carved from the same wood as the walls. You give a quiet greeting, but he speaks only a few words in return, the kind that tell you everything without needing details. Storm night, warm up, there is a place to sleep. His gesture leads you toward a corner where several fur traders have already settled for the evening ahead. Wooden cots line the wall. Each is covered with a mix of blankets, furs, and whatever scraps people have collected from years in the wilderness. A widely accepted detail from this period is how trading posts functioned as both commercial hubs and emergency inns. Travellers, trappers, and scouts knew they could usually find a place to sleep, even if it meant sharing space with complete strangers. These outposts were lifelines in regions where winter storms could erase the landscape in minutes. You choose a cot near the back, lowering yourself onto the rough bedding. The fur beneath you is stiff in places, soft in others. The blankets smell faintly of smoke sweat and animal hide. You run your fingers over a thick piece of beaver pelt and wonder about the hands that trapped it. The trade in pelts shaped entire economies, moving goods along rivers, trails, and winter roads. Somehow, these objects of commerce also became the blankets that helped people survive long frozen nights. A trapper seated nearby adjusts his gear, the leather creaking softly. He glances at you, then returns to oiling his rifle with slow, deliberate strokes. A curious bit of frontier lore drifts into your mind. Some trappers stuffed small pouches of dried sage or pine needles inside their bedding, believing the scent kept spirits of the wilderness at bay. Whether this was superstition or simply a pleasant smell to fall asleep to remains unclear, but you imagine the comfort of such a ritual during a raging storm. The trading post creaks with each gust of wind. Snow taps at the window shutters, the faint rhythm almost musical. You shift on the cot, feeling the boards beneath you groan. These buildings were usually constructed quickly without any real insulation. Cold seeped in through the smallest gaps. People compensated by layering so many blankets that they resembled cocooned caterpillars waiting for spring. You tuck one more fur along your side, letting its weight settle across your ribs. One of the fur traders coughs, wrapping a thick wool scarf around his neck. You watch him as he arranges his bed for the night. He lifts the corner of his blanket to show a smooth, flat stone sitting underneath. Earlier, he must have placed it near the main fire pit to warm. Heated stone served as makeshift sleep warmers in places where metal stoves were scarce, or where fuel was too costly to waste on something as luxurious as overnight heat. You feel a flicker of envy, wishing you had thought ahead. Light drifts through the cracks in the shutters. The room feels dim and intimate, the sort of space where silence grows heavy but not uncomfortable. Another trapper begins mending a rip in his glove, his movement steady in the glow of a single lantern. He hums a tune you do not recognize. It drifts through the room like smoke, soft and wandering. Experts today continue to puzzle over how trappers managed their sleep patterns during winter expeditions. Their journals mention irregular hours of rest and odd intervals of light sleep, interrupted by the need to check traps or feed fires. It seems no one fully understands how these men maintain their stamina in freezing conditions with so little uninterrupted rest. As you sit there listening to the hum of the lanterns, you feel a small echo of that mystery. Sleep arrives when it wants, not when you ask for it. You stretch your legs beneath the blankets, adjusting to the uneven cot. The wood feels lumpy, but the layer of furs softens it. A beaver pelt brushes your cheek. Its fur is dense and luxurious, silky in a way that surprises you. Pelts like this were the backbone of the commerce that built these trading posts. Without them, there would have been no reason for people from distant cultures to converge here, no reason for such remote shelters to exist at all. The bed beneath you is part bedding, part currency, part survival strategy. A trader across the room lifts the edge of a heavy buffalo robe and invites you to move closer to share warmth. Communal warmth was common in these places. People did not always think twice about sleeping close, especially during storms. The human body was a heating instrument, and no one wanted to risk frost creeping into their extremities. You inch closer, grateful for the shared heat. The robe drapes over several of you like a single giant wing. Your breathing slows. The pelts hold warmth, well trapping it in their layers. The scent of smoke lingers in the air, mixing with the earthy musk of tanned hides. The lanterns cast wobbly shadows on the walls, making the space feel almost cave-like. You listen to the faint murmur of voices finishing their conversations for the night. Topics range from trapping seasons to the quality of the latest batch of trade goods to stories of storms that seemed large enough to swallow mountains. Your eyelids begin to grow heavy. You shift again, finding a position that eases the pressure on your shoulder blades. The sharing of warmth begins to work its magic. The bodies around you radiate heat like low, quiet fires. The pelts cocoon you. The cold outside remains fierce, but inside this log-walled refuge you feel sheltered, anchored by the presence of others who understand the wilderness as intimately as their own breath. You take a final glance around the trading post. The lanterns sway slightly as the wind nudges the walls. A trapper near the door turns onto his back, blanketed in fox fur. Another rolls onto his side, murmuring something incoherent. The room feels like a collective heartbeat settling into a gentle rhythm. You close your eyes. The warmth deepens. The snow whispers against the shutters, and you sink into the kind of sleep that the frontier demanded, practical, humble, born of exhaustion and gratitude, and the strangely comforting knowledge that even in the wilderness people found ways to rest together. You wake with a stiff neck, the scent of fur and smoke still clinging to your clothes, but the trading post has grown quiet behind you. The storm outside remains relentless, swirling across the plains with renewed force, and you know you cannot linger. So you step back into the cold, following a faint line of fence posts until the horizon reveals a cluster of low shapes scattered across a ranch yard. These buildings belong to cowhands who live on the edge of the open range, and tonight you will discover how they managed sleep when blizzards smothered everything in sight. The first structure you reach is a long, drafty bunkhouse made from rough boards hammered together with more hope than craftsmanship. Snow crowds around its base like an eager animal. You push through the wooden door which groans loudly as it opens. Inside, the air is warmer than outside, but still sharp enough to sting your nose. The room is narrow and cramped, filled with rows of simple bunks stacked with wool blankets, straw mattresses, and whatever coats the ranch hands happen to leave behind. A wide-known detail from ranching life rises in your memory. Cowboys, especially in winter, often slept on what they called ticks. These were fabric sacks stuffed with straw or dried grass. They offered minimal softness, but they lifted the sleeper off the cold floor, which made a tremendous difference during severe storms. You approach one of these bunks and press a hand against the mattress. The straw shifts beneath your palm, crunching softly. You imagine the hands that gathered that straw, probably in late summer, knowing exactly how valuable it would become in January. A ranch hand sitting near the iron stove nods to you. His face is weathered by wind and sun, his beard stiff with frost. He motions toward an empty bunk tucked close to the stove. You make your way there, welcoming the warmth radiating across the room. Another cowboy lies nearby with a hat pulled over his eyes, his boots still on. That is another frontier truth. Cowboys often slept fully dressed in winter, because undressing meant losing what little heat their clothes trapped. You slide onto the bunk, grateful for the thick wool coat still wrapped around your shoulders. As you settle in, your attention drifts to an odd little frontier custom you once learned about. Some cowhands hung their wet gloves on sticks near their bunks, and believed that if they dried crooked or stiff overnight, the weather would worsen by morning. Whether such predictions held any accuracy remains unknown, but you glance at a pair of misshapen gloves dangling from a peg, and wonder what kind of omen they represent tonight. The bunkhouse groans as a gust of wind slams against its wallboards. Cold air snakes through the gaps between them, brushing your ankles with icy fingers. You adjust one of the wool blankets and tuck it more tightly around your legs. These blankets are scratchy, heavy, and deeply worn, but their weight adds comfort. Many were woven from coarse wool that held heat even when damper necessity during long days on the range when snow soaked everything a cowboy wore. You shift on the straw tick which rustles like autumn leaves. The noise does not bother you. Sound in a bunkhouse was constant. Snoring, coughing, muttering boots clunking onto the floor, someone poking the fire, someone else turning over on a lumpy bed. Privacy was a luxury no one expected. Sleep came in fragments. You rest your head on a bundled coat and close your eyes, letting the warmth of the stove wash across your cheek. The cowboy nearest the fire sits up and begins adjusting the damper. Sparks pop inside the stove, sending a sprinkling of orange light across the dark room. He offers you a small tin cup filled with something hot. You take a sip. It is strong coffee, thick enough to feel like it might stand upright if poured onto a plate. Strong Ranch coffee was a long-running tradition. It kept men awake when tending cattle through the night and warmed them in the coldest weather. You savour the bitter heat sliding down your throat. You look around the bunkhouse, noticing how men stowed their gear beneath their bunks or above rafters. Saddles, ropes, gloves, lanterns, blankets, and sometimes a lucky charm dangled above the door. Some cowhands carried small tokens in their pockets, believing they offered protection on the range. Others scoffed at such things. Modern researchers still cannot fully agree on how deeply superstition influenced ranch culture. Letters and artifacts hint at both skepticism and faith. You imagine that when storms howled like wolves, even the most practical cowboy might clutch a keepsake for reassurance. The wind picks up again, rattling the stovepipe. The ranch hand near you mutters something about needing to check the horses soon. Livestock were the heartbeat of a ranch, and keeping them alive during blizzards was essential. When storms struck, cowboys often took turns resting. Half the crew slept while the others braved the cold to make sure the animals were still standing, still breathing and not buried beneath drifting snow. You picture those men walking through the white haze, lanterns swinging, calling to the horses over the roar of the wind. You tuck the blanket more snugly beneath your chin. A faint scent of saddle soap hangs in the air, mingled with smoke from the stove and the earthy smell of damp wool. You let the sensory mix wash over you. It is not fragrant by any modern standard, but it carries a kind of honest comfort, the scent of people who spend their lives outdoors and trust one another with the weight of survival. A cowboy across the room shifts, muttering in his half-sleep. You smile faintly at how ordinary it feels. Even in the coldest storms, life in a bunkhouse maintained its rhythm. Men joked, grumbled, shared stories, or argued about horses and weather predictions. When bedtime arrived, they slipped into their bunks with minimal ceremony and accepted whatever rest they could get. The straw mattresses rustled, the stove popped, the wind howled, and still they slept. Your limbs begin to relax. The warmth of the stove reaches your fingertips. Sleepiness creeps into your bones, not the dangerous kind caused by freezing, but the genuine fatigue that comes after hours in the cold. You roll onto your side, the straw shifting again beneath you, and feel the bunkhouse settling around you like an exhale. You listen to the lull of winter wind outside and the steady breathing of the cowhands nearby. This is what frontier sleep often meant. Simple, imperfect, surrounded by noise and strangers, but safe enough to close your eyes. You draw the blanket to your chin, grateful for its scratchy weight. Slowly, gently, the bunkhouse drifts into a soft, collective quiet. The stove sighs, the rafters creak, snow whispers along the outer wall, and you, wrapped in wool and straw, finally let yourself rest inside the humble warmth of a ranch hand's winter refuge. The bunkhouse fades behind you as you continue eastward into a stretch of land where the trees thin, the wind strengthens, and the horizon lifts into low rolling hills. The storm has not ended. It has merely changed shape, pulling veils of snow across the plains like drifting silk. Your boots crunch in deep drifts as you head toward a cluster of broken branches, forming a faint silhouette ahead. This is where you will learn how lone trappers sheltered for the night when weather turned savage, improvising sleep inside hastily built structures that barely qualified as shelter at all. You reach the site as another blast of icy air swirls around your legs. A lean-to stands crooked against a few spindly trees, its roof fashioned from branches layered with hides stiff from the cold. These shelters were often thrown together in minutes, built by men who travelled light and could not waste time constructing anything elaborate. Surviving accounts from the era indicate that trappers often slept in places exactly like this, places created only to hold off death for one more night. You duck beneath the low entrance. Inside, the air is still frigid but at least shielded from the direct assault of the wind. The ground is covered with needles and scraps of dried grass. A small pit near the back still holds the faint smell of smoke, though no fire burns now. You slide into the shelter on your hands and knees, feeling the uneven earth beneath your palms. This kind of sleeping space was common among solitary trappers who roamed the wilderness for months at a time. Their shelters were not meant for comfort, they were meant for endurance. As you settle into the shadows, you notice how the hides along the roof crackle lightly when the wind presses against them. Despite the simplicity of the structure, the angled design pushes much of the snow aside, sending it sliding down the back wall in whispering sheets. A curious frontier habit comes to mind. Some trappers deliberately brushed pine pitch along the seams of their shelters to repel moisture, a sticky method that simultaneously sealed drafts and filled the interior with a sharp evergreen scent. Whether it truly improved insulation or simply made the place smell less like wet fur is difficult to judge, but you can almost imagine the aroma lingering here. Your hands brush against a bundle of dried branches tied together with sinew. The bundle rests where a trapper might have kept spare firewood or supplies. The hides shift again above you, and a shiver runs along your shoulders. You pull your coat tighter and crouch closer to the small pit, imagining the glow of a fire warming the space. Some trappers carried collapsible metal reflectors, placing them behind their campfire to redirect heat toward their sleeping spot. It was practical and clever, a detail often found in wilderness manuals of the 19th century. The wind rattles the trees outside. Even inside the lean-to, the cold gnaws at your fingertips. You lie back on the ground, adjusting a pile of branches beneath you, so they form a crude mattress. These makeshift beds softened the impact of frozen ground and lifted sleepers away from moisture. Travellers learned quickly that a few inches of brush could mean the difference between waking stiff and waking dangerously cold. You shift your weight, testing the structure. The branches crack softly, but hold. Somewhere far off, the cry of a bird cuts through the storm. Maybe a raven, maybe something else. Lone trappers use such sounds to judge distance direction, or even weather changes. A number of researchers remain divided on whether these men possessed genuine skill in reading nature's signals or whether their interpretations were shaped more by instinct than accuracy. As you listen to the faint echo, you sense how easily one might cling to any hint of guidance out here. Your fingers brush a patch of fur sewn into the back wall. It is part of the structure itself, added as reinforcement. The fur is coarse but still insulating, and you can imagine a trapper stitching it by firelight with numb fingers after skinning an animal earlier that day. Their survival hinged on such resourcefulness. Every hide served multiple purposes: clothing, bedding, trade goods, and structural material for shelters like this one. You draw your knees toward your chest, adjusting the branches beneath your hips. The ground vibrates slightly as a gust of wind hits the lean-to. Snow trickles through a small gap overhead and lands on your coat in a soft sprinkle. You brush it away and exhale, your breath rising into the cold air. You reflect on how sleep inside such a shelter must have felt. Uneasy, shallow, broken by the need to check the fire or make sure drifting snow did not bury the entrance. Yet many trappers considered these nights ordinary part of the rhythm of wilderness life. A distant snap of a tree limb echoes across the hills. The storm is gaining strength again. You adjust a hide along the inner wall, pressing it more tightly into place. As you work, you recall an unusual trick some trappers used to stay warm. They sometimes warmed small bone fragments or metal tools by the fire and placed them inside their boots or tucked them near their stomachs. The heat lasted only minutes, but provided brief relief in the worst cold. You tuck your hands beneath your coat, wishing for such pocket warmers now. The sky outside shifts into deeper grey. The dim light filtering through the hide roof takes on a faint bluish tint. You feel the weight of the storm building once more. The lean-to seems to shrink around you, yet it remains the only barrier between you and the relentless winter. You lie back fully, letting the branches cradle your spine in their uneven embrace. The scent of bark, old smoke, and animal hide mingles around you, forming a kind of primal perfume that evokes the memory of countless frontier nights. Your breathing begins to slow. The rhythm of the wind outside becomes hypnotic, rising and dipping like a long chant. The shelter rocks slightly as the branches creak. You close your eyes and allow the darkness behind your lids to deepen. You imagine the trappers who slept exactly like this, bodies curled against the cold mines, drifting between alertness and exhaustion, as storms raged only an arm's length away. The lean-to is imperfect, fragile and crude, yet in its rough embrace you find a strange sense of belonging. This is the kind of sleep the wilderness allowed partial, cautious, and shaped by the knowledge that dawn might bring calm or calamity. Still here in the hush of the storm, with the hide shifting above you, and the earth firm beneath you, you let your breath settle into a slow, steady rhythm. Gradually the world narrows to the sound of wind, the creak of branches, and the warmth of your own body tucked tightly within your shelter of necessity. Your eyelids grow heavy. The cold tightens its grip around the edges of the lean-to, but you remain inside your small pocket of relative safety. And with the storm pressing onward across the plains, you drift into the restless but essential sleep of a trapper waiting for morning. You leave the lean-to behind, just as the storm shifts again into something harsher and more determined. The wind rises with a hungry sound, lifting snow into long, sweeping curls that sting your cheeks. You move through the grey light, following the faint outline of a ridge, until the land widens into a flat plain where iron tracks slice across the snow. Beside the track stands a small cluster of shacks, each one barely larger than a freight crate, their roofs sagging under layers of ice. This is a rail camp, the kind hurriedly built by workers who laid track in all seasons, even in weather so severe that the very breath froze in their beards. Tonight you will learn how these workers try to sleep when the storms turn their shacks into rattling wooden coffins. You approach the largest shack first. Smoke leaks from a stovepipe that trembles in the wind. The door hangs crooked on its hinges. When you push it open, the smell of damp wood, coal smoke and unwashed clothing rushes out to greet you. The interior is dim and crowded. Several bunks line the walls, each made from planks crudely nailed into place. The air inside wavers with thin warmth from a small iron stove at the centre of the room. Men look up as you enter, their faces chapped by wind and streaked with coal dust. One of them gestures toward an empty bunk near the far wall. You make your way through the cramped space, ducking beneath a drying line strung with socks and shirts. Records from the railroad companies reveal that these work crews built their camps where the track layers paused for the night. They erected these shacks quickly, using whatever lumber was available, sometimes even dismantling old rail crates to create makeshift walls. You sit on the bunk. The wood beneath you is uneven and rough to the touch. A thin mattress stuffed with straw covers it, shifting noisily as you test it with your hands. The blankets piled at your feet look heavy enough, though they carry the unmistakable scent of smoke and sweat. Someone offers you a mug of thick broth from a dented tin pot on the stove. You accept and sip slowly, letting the warmth crawl into your chest. As you drink a peculiar practice from rail camp, life drifts through your memory. Workers sometimes stuffed bits of newspaper or old cloth inside the cracks of the shack walls to block the drafts. You can see evidence of that here. Crumpled pages from an out-of-date gazette peek through the wooden joints, fluttering slightly as the wind presses against the boards. The ink is smeared from moisture, leaving ghost-like shapes that resemble faces watching from the gaps. The stove pops loudly, sparks crackle inside it, casting a faint blush of red light against the far wall. Several workers gather near it, rubbing their hands together. Conversation is low, almost swallowed by the steady clatter of the wind. You hear mutterings about the coming day, about frozen rails that will need to be hammered back into alignment, about tools that must be heated before use. Some workers peel off their coats, revealing long underwear that looks nearly as thin as parchment. You lean back on your bunk, tucking a wool blanket over your legs. The shack trembles again as the storm hits its side with an angry rush of air. Documentation from that era suggests these rail shacks often failed under heavy snow, prompting workers to reinforce them with whatever scrap materials they could find. You notice extra planks nailed haphazardly across the walls, their edges jagged and mismatched. The entire structure seems held together by stubbornness. A gust of wind pushes through a small hole near your shoulder. You shift away from it and pull the blanket tighter. One of the men laughs quietly and hands you a wad of old cloth. You press it into the gap and feel the draft weaken. The workers lived by simple physics. Block the holes, pile the blankets, share the warmth. Sleep when you can. You latch onto a memory of an unusual winter strategy some crews used. When the cold became unbearable, workers sometimes heated iron spikes in the fire and wrapped them in cloth to create temporary hand warmers. They held them inside their coats until the metal cooled. Looking at the pile of tools near the stove, you can see how someone might resort to that soon. The room darkens as a cloud shifts across the last hint of daylight. Lanterns flicker to life, casting a golden haze around the interior. A few men begin preparing their bunks. One smooths the straw beneath his blanket. Another shakes out a thin quilt patched with squares of different colours. Somewhere near the back of the shack, a worker murmurs a quiet prayer. The sounds settle into a familiar nighttime rhythm. You stretch your legs beneath the blankets and breathe deeply. The smell of coal smoke clings to the air, heavy and metallic. You hear the distant groan of the rails outside, expanding and contracting in the cold. A low howl rises along the track line. The storm is returning to full strength. You understand now why these workers slept in shifts. Someone needed to tend the fire. Someone needed to check the drift piling near the door. Someone needed to make sure no one fell into dangerous cold sleep. A worker across from you adjusts the blanket over his shoulders and begins sharing a story about a particularly harsh winter, when the temperature fell so fast that spilled water froze before it hit the ground. As he speaks, another man adds his own tale about a time when snow piled so high against a rail shack that the door could not open in the morning. In the flickering lantern light, these stories sound half legend, half memory. There is a faint disagreement between two workers about whether the worst blizzard hit 10 years ago or 12. Their voices rise in mild argument before settling into a soft debate that continues quietly. Their conversation reminds you of something scholars still have not agreed on. There are conflicting interpretations about the exact winter conditions rail crews face during certain years, because journal entries and reports vary dramatically. Some accounts describe unbearable cold. Others seem almost casual. You listen to the men now and realize that memory itself bends under hardship, reshaping storms into whatever the mind can hold. You shift your weight on the plank bed, adjusting the blanket around your shoulders. The straw beneath you rustles, releasing a faint grassy scent. You picture a worker gathering that straw on a warmer day, not knowing that it would become the tool that kept someone warm enough to see another sunrise. Small choices mattered here, and survival often hinged on them. The stove's glow pulses softly through the room. A few men have already drifted into sleep, their breathing steady and low. Others lie awake, staring at the ceiling. You can hear the wind clawing at the outer boards, rattling the entire shack like a toy. You slide your hand beneath the blanket and press it against your chest, feeling your heartbeat echo against your palm. You lie back, letting the warmth seep into your bones. The blankets weigh heavily across your chest, their scent familiar now. The flicker from the lantern reaches your closed eyelids. The voices hush one by one. Outside, the storm tightens its grip, its roar muffled by the fragile walls around you. Slowly, as the rail camp creaks and sighs beneath the pressure of the storm, you drift into a sleep shaped by exhaustion, coal smoke, and the quiet understanding that survival often depends on nothing more than a thin mattress stubborn company, and the hope that the shack will still be standing by morning. You push open the rail shack door at dawn and step into a pale world where snowbanks glow like cold embers beneath a sky the colour of pewter. The storm has not finished with you, not even close. It circles back with fresh force, waving sheets of ice-filled wind across the open land. You lower your head and walk into it following a narrow trail stamped into the drifts by countless boots. Before long, the faint outline of a lone figure appears ahead, bundled heavily and trudging with a bedroll slung over one shoulder. You fall into step behind him, moving toward the life of the frontier nomads who carried their beds with them as they drifted from job to job. He eventually leads you toward a patch of stunted cottonwoods that offer a scrap of wind protection. He glances your way only briefly before settling his bedroll on the ground, as though you are simply another wanderer passing through a world too big to question. Workers without steady farm jobs, ranch hands between cattle drives, seasonal labourers and all manner of drifters slept like this throughout the 19th century. Surviving field notes from the period make it clear that such travellers relied on their bedding far more than any building, since a sturdy bedroll was sometimes the only place they could feel warmth during a storm. You kneel beside the man as he begins unwrapping his bedroll. The outer layer is waxed canvas cracked along the creases but still water-resistant. He shakes loose an inner layer of wool blankets patched with several colours of thread. You reach out and stroke the material. It is rough at first, but warmer beneath the surface. The drifter grunts approvingly and gestures to your own coat, inviting you to help yourself to a nearby patch of ground. You unfasten your own makeshift bedding, laying it over a mound of dried grass. A curious piece of frontier know-how comes to mind. Many travellers believed that sleeping with their boots near their stomach kept the leather from freezing and offered a bit of heat. You tuck your boots beneath a corner of your blanket, unsure whether the trick will work but willing to try anything in this cold. The wind shoves against the cottonwood, shaking powdery snow into your hair. You gather a small armful of twigs from beneath the trees. They snap easily between your fingers. Nearby, the drifter crouches over a small circle of stones, coaxing sparks from a steel striker. After several minutes of determined work, a small flame flickers to life. The two of you add twigs until the fire grows large enough to push back the cold in a modest circle. You lower yourself close to the heat bedding wrapped around your shoulders. The warmth feels thin at first, but gradually spreads along your arms and spine. Frontier nomads often made fires as small as possible to conserve fuel and avoid attracting too much attention. Fires were risky. Too large and they consumed precious wood. Too bright and they signalled to anyone nearby, friendly or not. The drifter pulls a chunk of jerky from his pocket and tears off a piece. He hands you some without looking at you directly. His silence fits the moment. People who lived this lifestyle spoke only when needed, conserving breath in winter storms. You chew quietly, tasting salt and smoke. The meat has an earthy toughness that seems to strengthen your jaw with each bite. One odd custom among bedroll wanderers involved tucking heated rocks between two layers of blankets before lying down for the night. They would heat stones near the fire, wrap them in cloth and slide them into the foot of their bedding. Some individuals insisted these stones kept them warm for hours, while others complained they lost heat almost instantly. The academic community has differing views on just how effective this method truly was. You cannot resolve the debate now, but you reach for a smooth rock near the fire just in case. The drifter finishes his meal and begins unbuttoning his coat. He works in slow, deliberate motions, as though each movement must be considered carefully to preserve heat. You follow his example, loosening your outerwear only slightly to avoid sweating. Moisture is the enemy here. Sweat can freeze against your clothing and chill you faster than the wind. The fire crackles softly. Sparks drift into the air, swirling upward, before vanishing into the storm's pale haze. You lower yourself onto your bedroll, fully pulling the blankets over your legs. The ground beneath you is cold but softened by the grass you gathered earlier. Travellers knew that insulating themselves from the earth was crucial. Cold ground could steal warmth even faster than frigid air. With that reminder, you slide a small layer of dried grass beneath your hips. The drifter lies down beside his own bedding, curling onto his side. His face softens in the firelight, revealing deep creases carved by countless nights spent sleeping under open sky. He hums a faint tune that drifts into the wind before dissolving. For a moment, the two of you share the quiet companionship of people who trust the land more than walls. A gust of wind pushes through the trees, rattling branches and blowing a drift of snow into your blankets. You brush it away and pull the fabric tighter across your chest. You listen to the storm rumbling above the sound like distant waves breaking against a shore. The rhythm begins to lull you. Your eyelids grow heavier with each flicker of flame. The fire settles into a steady glow. You drape one corner of the blanket over your head, forming a small tent of warmth around your face. The scent of wool and smoke fills your lungs. Your breath softens, flowing in slow, even waves. You notice how the drifter has positioned his back toward the wind, letting his blankets absorb the brunt of the cold. You mimic the posture, drawing your knees close to your chest. Different interpretations exist regarding how long people could sleep outside during severe winter storms. Some diaries mention only short bursts of rest, while others describe surprisingly deep sleep under layers of wool and fur. Experts continue to disagree on whether the human body simply adapted to the environment or whether people forced themselves into rest out of sheer necessity. As you lie here, you find it easy to believe both possibilities. Your fingers relax inside your gloves. Your body begins to feel heavier, as though the blankets are slowly anchoring you to the earth. The fire dims to a glowing bed of coals. A faint warmth continues to radiate toward you enough to keep the worst cold at bay. You reach for the heated stone wrapped in your extra cloth and tuck it near your stomach. It radiates faint heat, grounding you in the moment. The drifter's breathing deepens into a slow, steady rhythm. Snow whispers down from the branches above, landing in delicate flakes across your blankets. You close your eyes and listen to the subtle music of winter, the soft hiss of wind between trees, the quiet settling of snow, the muted crackle of dying coals. Wrapped in wool, cradled by the cold prairie, you drift into sleep the way countless nomads did before you. Not fully secure, not entirely warm, but safe enough for now. The storm continues its endless wandering overhead, yet within your small circle of fire and canvas the night becomes gentle, and as you nestle deeper into your bedroll the world narrows to breath warmth and the calm acceptance that rest can be found, even in the harshest wilderness. You rise from your bedroll, stiff but alive, brushing snow from your blankets as the drifter gives you a small nod before vanishing into the pale horizon. The storm, though less violent than before, still cloaks the world in shimmering white. You follow a faint track across the open ground, guided by a row of dark wooden posts leading toward a small settlement. Soon you reach a stagecoach stop, its weathered barn standing tall against the wind. Tonight, warmth will come not from quilts or fires alone, but from creatures whose bodies radiated heat into the rafters above. You push open the barn door. The smell hits you first. Hay leather sweat and horses. The air is warmer than outside and thick with the scent of life. Lanterns cast rippling light across the interior as stable hands move about tending to the animals. Some horses stamp the ground impatiently, their breath rising in soft clouds. You make your way to a loft ladder at the far end of the barn. A stable boy gestures upward, inviting you to climb. Stagecoach travellers often slept in haylofts when storms made continuing the journey impossible. Letters from the period indicate that these lofts provided a surprising level of heat, because warmth from the horses rose into the upper beams. You climb the ladder carefully, feeling each rung creak beneath your boots. The loft above is dim and spacious, filled with bales of hay and old burlap sacks arranged into rough sleeping shapes. You crawl onto a mound of hay, testing its softness with your palms. It crinkles gently under your weight, forming a pliant bed that smells vaguely sweet. You lie back for a moment, letting the warmth drift up from below like a quiet sigh. As you settle in, a memory comes to you about one of the less expected habits mentioned in travellers' journals. Some stagecoach passengers braided small hanks of horsehair into the edges of their blankets, believing the fibres helped wick moisture and kept bedding warmer. Whether the technique actually worked or simply comforted anxious travellers is unclear, but you imagine the coarse strands woven into wool, offering both texture and belief. Below you the horses shuffle and snort. Their presence is grounding. The rhythmic sound of hooves tamping into straw gives the entire loft a heartbeat. You shift your weight, noticing how the hay cushions your hips and shoulders. It is not luxurious, but it lifts you off the cold planks and absorbs heat more efficiently than bare wood ever could. As you adjust your position, you consider the old debate among specialists about how drafty these lofts truly were. Some argue that barns trapped warmth effectively due to their thick timber beams, while others insist that gaps between the boards allowed severe cold to creep in. Diaries conflict on the matter, leaving room for multiple interpretations. You feel both possibilities at once. A gentle current of cold air grazes your cheek, but your back is warmed by the invisible heat rising upward. A stable hand climbs halfway up the ladder to hand you a lantern. Its flame casts a soft glow across the hay. The light reveals tiny motes floating lazily through the air. You set the lantern near your head and scan the loft. Several makeshift beds are arranged along the outer walls, most built from hay bales topped with folded blankets. One bed holds a wool shawl that looks recently used. Another has a small pile of dried apples wrapped in cloth, perhaps left by a traveller stranded during an earlier storm. You dig your fingers into the hay, letting the coarse strands slide through your gloves. Travel journals often describe hayloft beds as surprisingly comfortable, provided you arrange the hay properly. Too loose, and it would fall apart beneath you. Too tight, and it felt like sleeping on bundles of rope. You fluff your own pile, shaping it into a shallow nest that curves around your ribs. The barn walls shake as a gust of wind rattles the wooden slats. Snow spills down from cracks in the roof like sifted flour. You brush a few flakes from your blankets and pull them tighter around your shoulders. The blankets smell faintly of animals and dust, but they feel warm against your skin. You tuck your knees in, slightly creating a pocket of heat beneath the fabric. Voices drift upward from below. Two stable hands are discussing tomorrow's coach route. The wind is too strong, the drifts too high, and they suspect the stage will not depart until the storm weakens. Their conversation rises in and out of hearing, mixing with the rustle of hay and the shifting of horses. You stretch your legs, feeling the hay adjust beneath your boots. A small puff of straw escapes with each movement. You turn your head toward the lantern and catch sight of a knot in the wooden beam above you. The grain spirals outward like a frozen whirlpool. You watch it for several moments, letting your mind soften around the simple pattern. That feeling of drifting attention, of noticing wood grain in flickering light, was familiar to many 19th century travellers who passed nights waiting for storms to pass. The long pauses between conversation created a dreamlike space that made sleep easier to find even in uncomfortable places. You reach for your coat and fold it beneath your head as a pillow. Its worn fabric feels solid and protective. You inhale deeply, breathing in the mingled scents of hay leather and warm animal breath drifting up through the loft. It is strange, but somehow deeply calming. People throughout history have found sleep in far less comforting places, and you sense why they cherished a refuge like this. A few flakes of snow filter through a crack above you. They melt instantly against your blanket. The barn groans as the wind tugs at its roof. You focus on the sounds below. A horse paws at the ground. Another exhales loudly. Their presence reassures you. You can even feel heat rising through the wooden planks of the loft, warming your spine. It is subtle, but unmistakable. Travellers sometimes joked that sleeping above horses made you feel like a loaf of bread rising in an oven. Others found the constant sound of animals soothing, a kind of natural lullaby. You close your eyes and listen more closely. The steady breathing of the herd forms a gentle rhythm, a slow inhale and exhale that syncs with your own. The lantern flickers. The fire inside it leans sideways before settling again. You pull your blanket higher, covering part of your face. Your breath forms a small warm pocket beneath the fabric. The world narrows into a confined and pleasant space made of hay wool and drifting warmth. Gradually your muscles relax. The noises of the barn soften into a hushed backdrop. The cold fades at the edges, replaced by the steady heat rising from the animals below. You curl into the nest you created, letting the hay cradle you just enough to ease the tension in your back. The wind continues its lonely song outside, but inside the barn loft you find a small sanctuary. A place where warmth comes from the breath of living creatures, and sleep arrives not through comfort but through the acceptance of simplicity. And so within the dim loft above horses who carry the world across frozen miles, you close your eyes and drift into the peaceful drifting slumber of a traveller waiting for dawn. You leave the barn loft behind as dawn slips through the clouds in slow, colourless waves. The storm clings stubbornly to the land, swirling around your boots as you trudge toward the low outline of a mining town tucked against the base of a rocky hill. Smoke rises from several chimneys drifting sideways in the wind. The closer you walk, the more you sense the rhythm of a place where people slept in cramped quarters after long freezing days underground. Tonight you will discover the mining town bunkhouse, a world where warmth came from bodies packed together and from a humility the frontier nearly always demanded. You push open the crooked wooden door of the bunkhouse. The air inside smells of coal dust, damp wool and boiled coffee. The room is long and narrow, lit by a few oil lamps flickering unevenly along the walls. Rows of bunks are squeezed so tightly together that there is barely enough room to turn sideways as you move through the aisles. The boards beneath your feet creak with every step. You choose an empty bunk along the far wall, its frame built from rough timber. A thin straw mattress sits on top, covered with a grey wool blanket that looks older than the building itself. You test the straw with your hand. It crackles and shifts, creating a firm but forgiving surface. Journals written by miners describe these bunks as both a blessing and a curse, warm enough once you settled in, but prone to sagging in the middle if the straw had not been freshly replaced. As you settle onto the mattress, you notice a faint vibration in the boards. It is the mine still humming beneath the earth even after workers have left for the day. Miners swore they could feel the ground breathing at night as though the mountain itself shifted in its sleep. Whether this sensation was caused by lingering heat, small rock movements, or simple imagination remains uncertain, but the effect is unmistakable. You feel it now, a faint pulsing that lingers beneath your spine. The bunk beside you is occupied by a man whose face is so covered in coal dust that only his eyes gleam clearly. He offers a quiet greeting, then returns to rubbing the stiffness from his hands. The lamps cast long shadows across his features, giving him the look of someone carved from black stone. A pot of stew simmers on a small stove at the centre of the room, releasing a scent of onion, salt, pork, and something earthy. A miner ladles some into a tin bowl and hands you a portion with a nod. You taste it slowly. It is simple food, but warm, heavy, and grounding. As you eat, you recall a curious technique miners use to warm their bunks. Some place their boots beneath their blankets after coming inside from the cold, believing that the small amount of trapped body heat would slowly warm the straw beneath. At first glance, it seems impractical, but miners who swore by it insisted it made sliding into bed less jarring. You place your own boots near your knees, willing the trick to work even a little. The bunkhouse fills with the quiet murmur of end-of-day conversations. A few men sit on overturned crates mending gloves or patching their shirts. Others roll their shoulders and stretch sore muscles, their movements slow and exhausted. You overhear talk about a new vein found deep in the mine, and also a debate about whether working it will risk a collapse. Their voices dip and rise, never fully settling on agreement. This reminds you of a recurring topic among historians who study mining life. There is no clear consensus about how much sleep miners actually got during winter storms, because surviving records range from tales of long nights of rest to descriptions of constant interruptions, fear of cave-ins and freezing drafts. As you listen to the conflicting tones in the room, both possibilities seem entirely plausible. The stove crackles softly. Its heat radiates outward, forming gentle waves that sweep across the bunks. You nestle deeper into your blanket, feeling warmth crawl up your arms, despite the cold draft slipping through cracks in the walls. Miners stuffed rags, scrap paper, or even handfuls of mud into these gaps to keep the wind out. You see several such patches around the room. One corner of the bunkhouse has a section where someone wedged in a broken pickaxe handle to brace the wall during a previous storm. The ingenuity feels both comical and admirable. Your hands brush the edge of the blanket. The coarse wool scratches slightly but holds warmth well. Miners often slept fully dressed, keeping their clothes on to conserve heat, and because the air at night could be brutally cold. You mimic their posture, wrapping your coat around you beneath the blanket. The layers trap heat more effectively than you expect. A miner near the far wall pulls out a small harmonica and plays a low wandering melody. It drifts through the room, wending its way between bunks and lantern shadows. The tune has no particular shape, but it soothes the space. You feel the sound settling on your skin like dust. Music in mining towns served many purposes: distraction, comfort, entertainment, and even a way to mark time when storms trapped everyone indoors. The window beside you rattles suddenly. Snow blows against it, scratching at the glass like a restless hand. You turn your face toward the sound, watching the frost patterns forming along the edges. They bloom outward in delicate shapes, curling and twisting like feathers carved from ice. The beauty is startling, even amid the cold. Your bunk creaks as you shift. The straw has warmed slightly enough to soften the firmness beneath your hips. You curl onto your side, pulling the blanket to your chin. The vibrations from the mine fade as the mountain cools for the night. The air inside the bunkhouse settles into a warm hush. The miners around you sink into sleep one by one. Their breathing becomes steady, layering over the faint song of wind. Someone lets out a quiet snore. Someone else mutters a wordless dream. The room feels safe enough, steady enough to let your own eyelids grow heavy. You focus on the warmth lingering beneath the wool blanket, the gentle pressure of the straw mattress, the faint hum left behind by the silent mine. The storm outside continues its long rumble, but in here, among men who share exhaustion as a common language, the night becomes bearable. You exhale, slow and deep. The bunkhouse sways gently, though you know it is only your tired body sinking into the straw. The lantern flickers one final time before dimming, and as the mining town rests beneath the watchful eye of the mountain, you drift into a sleep shaped by sweat heat and the quiet endurance of those who carve their lives into the earth. You leave the mining town with coal dust still clinging faintly to your sleeves. The storm sharpens as you walk, narrowing the world into a tunnel of swirling white. You follow the winding path of a frozen creek until the land rises into a patch of cottonwoods, their branches swaying under the weight of ice. Nestled between them stands a lone cabin, its windows glowing dimly, its stone chimney, coughing thin streams of smoke into the sky. Tonight, you will step inside a frontier home, where sleep depended on the stubborn glow of a hearth that never truly rested. You tug the door open slowly and step into the warmth. The cabin interior feels instantly soothing. Firelight flickers along the rough log walls, casting golden shadows that dance like warm spirits. A woman stands near the hearth, stirring a pot of stew with a wooden ladle. She glances up at you, gives a brief nod, and motions for you to close the door before the wind steals the precious heat. You move toward the fire, your cold fingers tingling as blood returns to them. The hearth dominates the cabin, large and rugged, its stones fitting together like puzzle pieces shaped by the land itself. Letters from homesteaders reveal just how crucial these fireplaces were. Families often spent entire nights tending them, feeding small pieces of wood at steady intervals to keep the flames alive. The stove might be absent, the woodpile small, but the hearth was the heart of the home, offering life in winter and comfort in storms. You sit on a wooden stool near the fire. Heat spreads across your shins, a deep warmth that reaches bone. The smell of stew drifts upward, thick with root vegetables and preserved meat. The woman gestures toward a wooden bowl on the table. You pick it up and taste a spoonful. It is hearty and simple, warmed by the fire's slow, steady breath. Around you, the cabin walls are draped with quilts. Some hang as decorations. Others block small cracks in the logs, keeping the drafts from creeping in. You take note of a curious detail that settlers sometimes relied on. Some families lined their interiors with newspapers or pages from old almanacs to help insulate gaps. It was a quick solution that added both warmth and reading material. You notice a few yellowed clippings tucked between the logs here. Their ink faded but still legible in places. The woman tends the fire again, kneeling to rearrange the embers. Sparks float upward, glowing like tiny stars before fading into the chimney. Her movements are slow but deliberate, the practiced gestures of someone who has done this countless nights. You watch her add another small branch, carefully positioning it to burn evenly. Firewood was precious. Frontier writings mention the effort required to gather enough to last through a storm, and many families ration their supply down to exacting limits. You glance toward the far end of the cabin where a bed is tucked beneath a bank of quilts. The bed looks inviting, though you can see frost crystals shimmering faintly along the edges of the window nearby. The cold creeps in even here where fire burns relentlessly. The woman notices your glance and offers a soft smile. She gestures to a pallet of blankets near the hearth instead. It is warmer there, safer from the draft. You nod gratefully. As you pull the blankets into place, you recall something unusual you once read about cabin sleeping habits. Some families placed a heated iron pot filled with embers beneath their beds to warm the quilts from below. Others used a long-handled warming pan filled with coals. Whether this technique was consistent or improvised depended entirely on available tools, but it served as a makeshift comfort in harsh weather. You find no warming pan here, but the fire's radiant heat makes the cabin feel surprisingly cozy. The woman sits down across the room with a small basket of mending. Her needle glints in the firelight as she repairs a torn sleeve. The only sounds in the cabin are the crackle of flames, the quiet scrape of her needle, and the occasional sigh of wind against the outer logs. The peacefulness feels gentle and intimate, a stark contrast to the roaring storm outside. Experts who study frontier domestic life sometimes disagree about how warm cabins like this truly were during blizzards. Some accounts paint them as toasty havens, while others describe bitter cold, lingering near the floor or radiating from uninsulated corners. The truth most likely lay somewhere between. As you shift beneath the blankets, you feel pockets of warmth near the hearth, and subtle threads of cold brushing the edges of your boots. A mixture of comfort and fragility. You settle into your pallet, arranging the quilts so they wrap snugly around you. The fabric smells of smoke wool and a faint trace of dried herbs. Many homesteaders kept sachets of lavender sage or cedar in their bedding, both for scent and to discourage pests. The fragrance drifting from your quilt feels subtle but soothing, a small reminder that even in constant hardship, people found ways to add touches of warmth and beauty. The woman finishes mending and rises to check the stew again. She tastes a small spoonful before adding a pinch of salt. Then she returns to the hearth, lifting a fire poker and rearranging the logs. The fire brightens, spreading fresh waves of heat across the room. You feel it wash over your face, soft and steady. The glow reflects in her eyes before she dims the lantern on the table, softening the cabin into warm twilight. You breathe deeply, letting the scent of wood smoke settle inside your lungs. The fire pops gently, sending a tiny ember tumbling onto the stones. The woman nudges it back with practiced ease. You admire how connected she seems to the rhythms of the fire, as though she and the flames understand each other. You turn onto your side, drawing the quilt higher. The fire casts a slow-moving glow across the rafters above you. Patterns of shadow drift along the walls. Outside, the wind howls again, but its voice sounds muffled now, as if the cabin itself refuses to let it intrude. Your breathing deepens. The warmth from the hearth grows stronger, pooling around your chest and easing the stiffness from your limbs. The floor is firm beneath you, but the quilt and nearby fire create enough softness to lull your mind toward stillness. The woman finally lies on her own bed, pulling quilts over her shoulders. The cabin settles into silence. Only the crackling of the fire remains a comforting rhythm that pulses gently through the room. You close your eyes. Heat, wool, firelight. The world becomes a small glowing cocoon protected by the steady heartbeat of a frontier hearth. And as the storm prowls outside, you drift into an easy anchored sleep that countless homesteaders once knew, warmed by the flames that held the night at bay. The warmth of the cabin hearth still clings faintly to your skin as you step back into the muted grey of the storm. Snow drifts across the path like restless spirits, and the wind presses at your coat with steady insistence. You follow a narrow trail that winds across a barren stretch of prairie until a small wooden structure rises ahead, its roof bowed slightly under the burden of ice. A telegraph outpost, lonely, remote, and barely large enough for one person to work inside. Tonight, you'll learn how its operators found sleep in the middle of storms that refuse to show mercy. You push open the door and slip inside. The air here smells of cold metal ink and the faint tang of old wires. A small iron stove glows near the centre of the cramped room, and next to it sits a work table cluttered with coils, papers, and the familiar sound of a telegraph sounder clicking in steady patterns. The operator looks up from his stool, eyes heavy with exhaustion, but softened by the glow of the coals. He motions to a corner where a narrow cot rests beneath a window glazed with frost. You approach the cot and brush your hand along its wool blanket. The fabric is worn thin in places but still capable of holding warmth. Telegraph operators like this one often lived alone for weeks at a time, maintaining communication lines between distant towns. Contemporary reports leave little doubt that these outposts served as vital lifelines during winter storms, relaying urgent messages about stranded travellers, blocked rail lines, or missing supply wagons. You sit down on the cot, feeling the wooden frame creak beneath your weight. The operator returns his attention to the sounder. Its clicks echo through the small room like the heartbeat of some invisible creature moving through the wire. He scribbles notes on a sheet of paper, the telegraph key tapping with rhythmic determination. The steadiness of the machine feels comforting even if you do not understand the code. As you settle into the blanket, a faint vibration moves through the wall. The wind outside rattles the siding, making the entire outpost shiver. You glance at the stove. Its warmth radiates outward in gentle pulses, turning the tiny room into a pocket of refuge surrounded by an ocean of white. One of the less common habits mentioned in operators' journals involved placing flat stones near the stove, then sliding them under bedding to create a kind of primitive warming pad. You spot a stone near the stove's base and smile at the thought of following that old trick. The operator leans back and rubs his eyes. He gestures to a small kettle on the stove. You pour yourself a tin cup of weak tea and sip slowly, letting the heat slide down your throat. The taste is earthy, slightly bitter, but pleasant. You imagine how many nights operators survived on nothing but this tea and stale bread while the wind lashed the walls. Snow presses against the window, forming swirling patterns of white. The glass fogs with your breath as you lean closer. Beneath the frost, crystals, faint lines of light ripple across the prairie as lightning flickers far away, muted by the storm. You draw the blanket up to your shoulders and lie back, fully adjusting the pillow made from rolled coats. The telegraph sounder clicks rapidly for several seconds. The operator deciphers the message with tired focus, then jots down a new line in his notebook. His expression tightens and he glances toward the door. Concern, maybe, or simply fatigue. He returns to the key and taps out a response. The rhythm is hypnotic. You take a deep breath, letting the warm air fill your lungs. Accounts preserved from the era often mention how telegraph operators slept in short bursts, waking frequently, to check for urgent signals. The demands of the job rarely paused even during storms. Sleep became something taken in fragments in whatever minutes the wires granted. You rest your head against the pillow and wonder how anyone could maintain clarity after such fragmented rest. The sounder goes quiet for a moment, leaving the outpost suspended in stillness. Only the wind outside continues its rumble. The operator closes his notebook and reaches for a blanket folded near his stool. He drapes it over his shoulders and sits near the stove, warming his hands. You hear him hum a low tune, slow and wandering as if he is coaxing warmth into his bones. An unexpected detail from frontier telegraph life comes to mind. Some operators hung bits of fabric soaked in lamp oil near windows to block drafts. It was not elegant, but it helped trap heat when storms made the building groan. You notice such a cloth pinned beneath the window frame, stiff with cold, but still holding back the worst of the wind. The stove crackles. A small ember pops, sending a spark toward the hearthstone. The room shimmers with heat and shadow. You adjust your position on the cot, feeling the blankets settle more snugly around your torso. The warmth seeping from the stove meets the cold leaking from the corners, creating a delicate balance that mimics the tension outside between storm and silence. Scholars who analyse these remote outposts often disagree when determining how isolated operators truly felt. Some evidence paints them as deeply lonely, while other letters describe a sense of purpose and connection that came from transmitting messages across vast distances. Listening now to the quiet clicks of the telegraph, you can feel both truths merging. Isolation and connection living side by side. Your breathing slows as the storm thickens beyond the walls. Snow lashes the windows again, but the outpost holds firm, its beams creaking with stubborn resolve. The operator shifts into his own bedroll in the opposite corner, lifting one corner of the blanket to catch the glow from the stove. The sounder falls silent at last, leaving the room in deep quiet. The stove hums faintly. The wind growls beyond the boards. The cot beneath you warms steadily, the blanket tightening around your shoulders like a gentle hand. The lantern on the table begins to dim. Shadows stretch across the floor, then climb the walls like slow-moving vines. You let your eyes close, soothed by the soft glow of the coals and the faint scent of ink and metal. Wrapped in wool, surrounded by warmth and the quiet echo of messages that have crossed miles of frozen land, you slip into a half-sleep that feels suspended between solitude and safety. And as the telegraph outpost holds its ground against the storm, you drift into the kind of rest that comes from knowing the night is watched by a steady heartbeat of clicking wires. The telegraph clicks fade behind you as you step once more into the storm's deep quiet. Snow has piled so high along the prairie grasses that the world feels sculpted into soft rolling dunes of white. You walk with your hands tucked close to your chest, boots sinking with each step. Soon the faint outline of a sloping embankment comes into view, a jagged lip of earth shaped by wind and runoff. At its base lies a shadow that looks almost like an open doorway carved straight into the land, a dugout, a refuge cut from soil itself. Tonight you will learn how settlers faced blizzards by burrowing into the earth for sleep, turning the ground into both shield and shelter. You descend carefully toward the opening. The wind howls overhead but becomes gentler as you approach the recessed wall. You kneel before the entrance and brush away a curtain of snow with your glove. The door is nothing more than a plank set into the earth held in place by two wooden stakes. You pull it aside and duck inside. At once the storm's roar diminishes to a muted hum as though the land has placed a hand over your ears. The dugout is dim, low-roofed and smelling faintly of damp soil and smoke. Walls of packed earth rise on all sides, their surfaces uneven but sturdy. A small fire pit smoulders near the centre, its coals glowing faintly. Next to it rests a bedroll laid across a thick layer of grass and hides. Contemporary descriptions of frontier life make it evident that dugouts served as emergency shelters when storms rose too quickly for settlers to reach proper homes. Some families spent entire winters in these subterranean rooms, relying on the earth's natural insulation to keep life possible. You move close to the fire pit, rubbing your hands together as the warmth grazes your skin. The air feels surprisingly stable here. No drafts claw at your face. No snow blows under the door. The silence is deep, almost comforting. You sit on the grass-covered floor and lower the bedroll across your lap. The hides beneath it add thickness and softness, turning cold ground into something almost welcoming. A dim lantern flickers near the back wall. Its light reveals a few shelves carved directly into the earth, holding jars, a tin cup, and a small soft brush used for sweeping soil dust from bedding. You recall reading about a rarely mentioned practice among dugout residents. They sometimes press dried reeds or willow branches into their walls for reinforcement, creating a kind of primitive lattice that prevented crumbling. You notice a few such strands woven like fragile ribs into the wall above your head. You lie down on the bedroll, adjusting the layered hides. They smell faintly of wood smoke and animal musk. The combination creates an earthy comfort that feels unexpectedly grounding. The fire pit's heat drifts across the soles of your boots, warming you from the bottom up. You take a slow breath. The air is cool but not biting. You can almost imagine a family huddled here on storm nights, waiting for the blizzard to pass. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. Soil absorbs sound, turning even the sharpest noises into soft murmurs. You hear the muffled wail of the storm filtering down through the roof, but it reaches you as a distant hum, almost like the sea pressing against a faraway shore. That quietness must have felt miraculous to settlers suddenly cut off from the world above. Period letters describe an unexpected serenity in dugouts, a sense of being cocooned inside the earth, rather than battered by the elements. Your hand drifts across the floor. The grass mat beneath you is thick and dry. Settlers often gathered such grass in late autumn, storing bundles in haylofts, or tying them to their roofs, then bringing them inside as bedding when storms forced them underground. The grass was both mattress and insulation, lifting sleepers away from damp earth. A shift in the wind above causes a shower of snow to patter against the roof. You glance upward, noting where the earthen ceiling bows slightly under weight. People who use dugouts regularly reinforce their roofs with logs or planks, placed across the top, layering sod above for extra support. You can see the ends of a few logs tucked into the sides, forming a rough grid that holds back the winter. You adjust the blanket over your torso, feeling warmth settle slowly into your chest. The solitude of this shelter feels different from the telegraph outpost. There is no clicking, no lantern chatter, no voices behind walls, just earth. Pure, unmoving, patient earth. A type of silence that belonged to people who lived face to face with a weather far more powerful than themselves, yet even within this calm uncertainty lingers. Different researchers have offered contrasting interpretations about how healthy or hazardous long-term dugout living truly was. Some accounts praise the insulation and stability, others warn of dampness, smoke inhalation, and collapsing walls. As you rest here, you sense both truths. The air is gentle but tinged with moisture. The roof feels safe but carries weight. Even refuge had limits. Your body sinks a little deeper into the bedding. You pull your coat tighter beneath the blanket to trap heat. A soft draft brushes your cheek, not cold enough to bother you, but enough to remind you that this place is alive with small shifts in temperature and air. You turn onto your side, adjusting the hide beneath your shoulder. The fire pit glows softly, casting a warm halo across the packed earth. Shadows ripple along the walls like flowing soil. You watch those shapes move as your breathing steadies a calm rhythm in an otherwise fierce world. The lantern near the shelves flickers again, then steadies, painting faint patterns of gold across the low ceiling. Your eyelids grow heavy. The hush of the dugout wraps around you like a second blanket. Above you the storm rages with renewed force, but down here it feels like distant thunder in another world. The earth holds you gently, neither warm nor cold, simply stable. You tuck the blanket beneath your chin, letting your breath warm the small pocket of air around your face. The bedroll softens beneath your weight. The hides settle with a faint rustle. Your body loosens, sinking further into the embrace of soil and grass. In this underground cradle, cut from the land with human hands and shaped by the necessity of survival, you drift towards sleep, a sleep ancient, simple, and anchored by the quiet weight of the earth itself. And as the blizzard piles its fury above you, rest in a shelter that knows how to keep secrets, how to soften storms, and how to cradle those who trust it through the longest winter nights. You climb slowly out of the dugout at first light, brushing loose snow from your coat, as the storm sighs across the prairie like a tired giant. The wind has softened, but the cold deepens, tightening its grip on everything your eyes can reach. You walk along a ridge where drifts have piled into vast smooth shapes. The snow is so deep here that the land seems to breathe beneath it, rising and falling in slow white waves. Ahead, you spot a slope carved by the wind into a hollow curve. It looks almost like the entrance to a tunnel. This is where you will learn how travellers, hunters and stranded settlers built snow caves in desperate moments, betting their lives on the insulating power of frozen silence. You approach the drift and test its surface with your glove. The snow is firm, packed by hours of wind. You widen the hollow with your hands, scooping out loose powder, until the space becomes large enough to crawl inside. The icy walls glow faintly, catching what little light filters through the storm clouds. You duck your head and enter on hands and knees, feeling the cold press gently against the back of your neck. Inside, the snow cave is quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but hushed in a way that feels otherworldly. The walls curve inward like a shell. The air is still unmoving. Travellers' journals from the late 19th century often noted that snow caves, when built correctly, could be far warmer than sleeping outside because the snow acted as a natural insulator. You can feel the truth of that immediately. The wind disappears. The bitter sting of the storm softens into a manageable chill. You widen the interior by pushing more snow aside, creating a shallow bench near the back. Your breath fogs in soft puffs drifting toward the ceiling. You settle onto the snow bench and begin arranging your coat and blanket to create a buffer between your body and the icy surface. Every movement is slow and careful. Snow caves require delicacy. A wrong twist of the elbow, too much pressure on the wall, and the entire shelter can collapse. As you adjust your bedding, an unusual detail from frontier lore comes to mind. Some wilderness travellers sprinkled a thin layer of evergreen needles on the floor of their caves, claiming the needles kept their clothing from freezing to the ice beneath them. Whether this worked consistently is difficult to determine, but you imagine how comforting the smell of crushed pine would be in a place otherwise made entirely of cold. You pull your blanket tighter. The cave glows with a faint blue tint created by light filtering through the snow overhead. You notice how the ceiling arches slightly sloping upward toward a small opening you left near the door. This ventilation hole is essential. Without it, your breath could accumulate moisture that refreezes, and the air could stagnate dangerously. Several accounts from mountain hunters mention the importance of leaving at least one small channel for air to flow, though the precise size people recommended varied widely across journals. You stretch your legs carefully, feeling the snow compress softly beneath your weight. The cold nips at your ankles, but not harshly. It is a steady, tolerable chill, the kind you can think through rather than the kind that panics your nerves. You breathe out a long, slow cloud of air. The silence inside the cave settles deeper, wrapping itself around you. Above your head, a faint crackle slips through the snow, possibly a branch shifting under ice, possibly more snow drifting into place. You listen closely. The sounds are muted, distorted by layers of frozen crystals. Specialists who study winter survival techniques still discuss the acoustic oddities of snow caves, noting how voices and noises often travel strangely, making direction difficult to judge. You hear distant moans from the wind outside, but they float in circles impossible to place. You shift your position, pulling your coat beneath your hips for insulation. The snow beneath you feels strangely soft, almost spongy. You remember a description from an old trapper's journal in which he compared a well-made snow cave to the inside of a hollowed loaf of bread. The metaphor seems absurd until now. The cave is firm, yet yielding cold, yet forgiving, as though sculpted by some giant baker of storms. The light filtering through the ceiling changes slightly. A pale shimmer sweeps across the walls. You watch it mesmerized. Snow refracts light in unpredictable ways. Sometimes it creates halos, sometimes glows, sometimes pulses with faint color. You lie back and let the shifting illumination wash across your vision. You take another slow breath, allowing your muscles to settle. The snow cave has its dangers, but it also offers a rare sense of enclosure. Many travelers wrote that these shelters felt oddly comforting, even intimate, because the world shrank into a small, still room where your breath and heartbeat were the only moving things. You feel that intimacy now. The snow quiets your thoughts as effectively as it quiets the wind, but there is no forgetting the risk of collapse. Reports from the era mention accidents when heavy snowfalls or sudden thaws cause ceilings to give way. Modern analysts still voice differing opinions about how safe these structures truly were for extended nights, mainly because the accounts vary between praise and warning. You remain alert, listening for signs of shifting weight above. You slide your hands beneath the blanket and curl your fingers against your chest. Warmth slowly begins to gather. Your own body heat is the engine that will make this cave livable through the night. You pull your knees closer to your torso, recognizing that conserving heat is not just a matter of comfort but survival. The silence deepens. You hear your heartbeat in your ears. You hear the whisper of your breath. The snow amplifies both sounds, slightly making your body feel larger than the space around you, a sensation both grounding and surreal. The storm outside thickens again, pushing clumps of snow across the entrance in soft thumps that echo gently inside the cave. You reach forward with your glove and clear part of the opening, ensuring the gap remains wide enough to breathe easily. A single gust sneaks in, brushing your face with cold fingers. Then the quiet returns. You nestle deeper into your coat and blanket. The cold still seeps in here and there, but not enough to trouble you. Your body begins to find its rhythm, relaxing into the stillness. The snow walls seem to hold a slow pulse, as though the cave itself is breathing beside you. Your eyelids lower. You exhale again, your breath drifting toward the roof like a ghost. The faint blue glow dims as clouds drift across the sun outside. The cave becomes a small monochrome world, soft and muted. You tuck your chin down and curl yourself into the smallest shape you can, sealing warmth in tight layers around your body. The air feels steady. The snow feels safe enough. Your breathing becomes quiet and rhythmic. And in this fragile shelter carved from the storm itself, you drift into a sleep that countless travellers once trusted with their lives. A sleep balanced between danger and peace, held aloft by nothing more than the quiet strength of frozen walls. You crawl out of the snow cave with careful movements, brushing crystals from your sleeves as the wind wraps itself around you once again. The storm has calmed just enough for you to see several yards ahead, revealing a landscape swept clean of detail, as though a giant hand has smoothed the prairie. You walk slowly, following the bend of a frozen creek until the land widens into open grassland. In the distance, you spot a cluster of tall, narrow structures built from wood poles, and stretched hides standing firm against the storm like rooted spirits. The shapes grow clearer, and you realize you have reached an indigenous winter encampment. Tonight you will learn how native communities blended deep environmental knowledge with carefully designed winter shelters, creating sleep spaces that endured even the harshest blizzards. A figure steps from one of the lodges, lifting a hand in quiet greeting. You return the gesture and follow the soft trail leading to the largest lodge in the circle. The hide covering rustles gently in the wind. A flap is lifted for you and warm air rushes out, carrying scents of smoke-roasted meat and sweet grass. You duck inside. The interior glows with firelight. The lodge walls curve upward in graceful lines of wood poles, creating a tall central space that feels surprisingly open. A fire burns steadily in a shallow pit, smoke rising toward a vent at the top that lets fresh air circulate. You sink onto a soft pile of woven mats arranged around the fire. Heat radiates outward, soothing your frozen fingers. You look around, noticing intricate beadwork on a hanging bag and bundles of tools neatly arranged along the wall. Travellers' accounts from the 19th century repeatedly mention how sophisticated these winter lodges were both in design and function. The layered hides blocked wind effectively, while the angle pole structure allowed warmth to gather near the ground. You can feel the truth of that now. The cold outside feels like a distant memory. A woman seated near the fire hands you a small bowl of warm broth. You sip it gratefully, letting the heat slide down your chest. A child nearby giggles softly as someone braids her hair. The atmosphere feels calm, grounded, and rhythmic. This is a space shaped for both rest and community. As you observe the lodge more closely, a surprising detail surfaces in your memory. Some lodges included small pockets sewn into the inner lining of the hide walls, used to store herbs or dried grasses believed to purify the air or encourage pleasant sleep. You notice a faint fragrance near one corner, something earthy and comforting. Perhaps a small pouch tucked into the layers. The smell blends with the smoke in a soothing harmony. The fire pops softly, sparks dance upward, chasing each other toward the vent in playful spirals. You stretch your legs across the mat. The floor beneath you is made from layered hides and reeds, insulating your body from the frozen ground. Travellers who recorded their experiences frequently praised the warmth generated by these layered floors, which stayed surprisingly dry even during severe weather. An elder seated across from you begins telling a story in a low, steady voice. His hands move gently as he speaks. Though you don't understand each word, the cadence feels like a lullaby shaped from time itself. You imagine how countless winter nights were passed in this same rhythm, with stories drifting toward the ceiling, while storms clawed at the hide walls. Your eyes drift to a row of painted symbols along the interior. The colours remain vivid despite smoke exposure. Each symbol likely holds meaning, marking lineage, seasons, or spiritual guidance. You trace one of the patterns lightly with your gaze, feeling your thoughts settle into a calm quiet. The fire shifts again, casting fresh shadows across the lodge walls. You pull your blanket tighter and adjust your body close to the heat. A gentle breeze moves through the vent, clearing the smoke and refreshing the air. The engineering behind this ventilation system impresses you. Early observers often noted how efficiently smoke was drawn upward, leaving the air inside surprisingly clear. Even now, the air feels clean enough to breathe deeply without discomfort. You stretch your toes beneath the blanket. A soft hide rests atop your feet, warming them instantly. One of the young men in the lodge laughs softly and pushes another hide toward you, encouraging you to take more if needed. His gesture reminds you of a little known practice some winter communities used. They sometimes placed heated stones inside small wrap pouches, using them as personal warmers during the coldest nights. You see several round stones near the fire that carry a faint reddish tint from earlier heating. The method seems practical and comforting. Outside, the storm shifts again. A new wave of wind presses against the lodge, causing the hide walls to ripple like gentle water. The sound is deep and resonant, almost musical. Analysts who study these structures often point out that the design allowed the lodge to flex rather than resist, making it more resilient during harsh storms. Watching the lodge respond to the wind, now you sense that adaptability in every movement. Still, not all aspects of winter life inside these lodges are fully understood. Some researchers examining surviving accounts often reach conflicting conclusions about how frequently interiors needed adjustments during heavy snowfalls, or how often caretakers reinforced the poles when weather worsened. The records vary, leaving room for multiple interpretations. You feel both the structure's strength and its sensitivity, understanding why these debates continue. Someone places another small log onto the fire. The flame brightens, painting warm gold along your cheek. You angle your body so that the heat soaks deeper into your layers. The floor beneath you is firm but cushioned, the woven mat softening every point of contact. You exhale slowly. The warmth gathers around your ribs, easing your breath. A girl curls beside her mother just a few feet away, pulling a fur throw over both their shoulders. Their breathing sinks in slow waves. The fire's glow reflects in their eyes as they settle into sleep. You watch them for a moment, your own body starting to mirror their softness. You adjust your blanket again, tucking it beneath your shoulder. The mats beneath you shift slightly as you settle into a comfortable position. The lodge's gentle crackle and the quiet murmur of sleeping bodies fill the air. It feels intimate, ancient, and welcoming. You sense the depth of knowledge embedded in the structure around you. It is not just a shelter. It is a carefully crafted living space, shaped by centuries of understanding. Your eyelids grow heavy. The warmth at your feet spreads upward. The shadows move in slow, calming waves along the curved walls. Outside, the storm fades to a whisper. Inside, the fire remains steady, its glow, guiding you into stillness. You inhale the scent of sweetgrass again. You exhale long and slow. The earth-to-hide walls and the fire encircle you with quiet assurance, and as your breathing deepens, you drift into a sleep shaped by wisdom older than the frontier itself. You step out of the lodge with warmth still lingering around your ribs, the scent of sweetgrass and smoke clinging faintly to your clothes. The storm has shifted into a low growl, sweeping across the prairie in broad, restless strokes. You trudge northward until the land rises into a gentle slope, revealing the distant outline of a military fort. Its timber walls stand square and upright, shoulders pressed against the storm as though daring winter to test them. You pass through the gate boots, thudding against frozen ground, and soon find yourself guided toward a long, narrow building where soldiers huddle for the night. Tonight you will learn how these barracks served as both hardship and refuge when freezing winds bore down on the frontier. You open the door and are met by the mingled scents of damp wool, tallow candles, and iron. The interior is dim lit by a single lantern swaying slightly from a ceiling hook. Soldiers sit on rough wooden benches, some rubbing their hands near a small stove, others removing their boots with tired sighs. A row of bunks lines each wall stacked too high. You take in the sight of blankets folded with exacting neatness, each one draped over a thin straw mattress that barely softens the planks beneath. One soldier nods toward an empty bunk. You walk over and brush your hand across the mattress. It crackles faintly, and a small puff of straw escapes from a worn seam. Notes preserved from military supply ledgers make it clear that barracks across the frontier often struggled with inadequate bedding, especially during harsh winters. Soldiers were issued standard wool blankets and straw ticks, but replacements came slowly and storms had no patience for bureaucracy. You sit on the edge of the bunk, letting your weight test the frame. The planks feel solid enough, though they sag slightly at the centre. A few soldiers nearby laugh quietly as one recounts a story of a bunk collapsing months earlier when a recruit sat too heavily on the corner. The mood in the room feels worn but resilient, like a rope that is frayed yet still holds. As you remove your gloves, you notice a small metal cup tucked under the pillow. A soldier leans over and explains that some men warmed water in such cups and sipped it before bed to steady their breathing in the cold. His voice lowers as he adds that the water often froze before morning unless someone kept the stove alive through the night. You nod in understanding, feeling the dry air tug at your throat. A lesser-known detail from barracks life comes to mind. Soldiers sometimes stuffed crumpled letters or extra bits of wool into the gaps between the logs to stop frigid drafts from knifing through the room. You find evidence of this in the far wall, where torn scraps of cloth peek from the timbers, each one a small testament to someone's attempt to bend winter to their will. The stove crackles softly. A soldier opens the iron door just long enough to toss in a handful of splintered wood. The flame brightens, lighting his face with a warm glow, before he closes the door and the room shifts back into its soft half-light. You feel the heat drift across your legs in slow waves, barely enough to warm you fully, but enough to remind you how precious a steady fire can be. You stretch your arms overhead and lower yourself onto the bunk fully. The mattress shifts and crackles beneath you. Your head rests on a pillow made from folded coats. The wool scratches your cheek gently. You adjust your position until the straw moulds around your shoulder blades. A discussion begins across the room concerning the best way to keep boots from freezing overnight. One soldier insists on placing them under the bed near the stove side, while another swears by wrapping them in a cloak and tucking them beneath his chest as he sleeps. Their banter reveals something archives rarely highlight. Practical knowledge among soldiers varied dramatically, shaped by personal trial and error more than official instruction. The lantern sways faintly as a gust of wind hits the outer wall. Frost creeps along the edges of the window, branching into delicate crystalline patterns. You watch the frost grow for several seconds, mesmerized by how quickly the cold makes itself visible. You pull your blanket up to your chin. Its weight is modest but comforting. The wool smells faintly of soap and camp smoke. Around you, the barracks fills with the quiet rustle of men settling for the night. One coughs. Another mumbles into his pillow. Someone near the stove removes a journal from his pocket and scribbles a few lines by lantern light, An older soldier across the room begins telling a soft story about a winter long ago when the fort was nearly buried under snowdrifts. His voice is steady, but his eyes reveal the memory's bite. He speaks of long nights spent tending fires, of sharing rations to keep spirits up, and of sleeping in layers so thick he felt more quilt than man. The story carries a mixture of humour and fatigue familiar to anyone who has lived through too many cold seasons. There remains persistent uncertainty in historical studies about how warm these barracks actually stayed during blizzards. Some accounts describe surprisingly comfortable nights, thanks to thick logs and diligent stove tending. Others paint a much bleaker picture with men waking to find frost on their blankets and ice forming in their water cups. Your experience tonight seems poised between both extremes. Warm near the stove, cold near the walls, with a shifting balance that depends entirely on luck and fuel. You shift your weight, adjusting your coat beneath your hips. The straw mattress rustles and forms a shallow cradle around your body. A soldier passes by and places a small heated stone wrapped in cloth near your feet. He gives a brief nod before moving on. The warmth from the stone spreads slowly, surprising you with how effective such a simple item can be. The lantern dims. Shadows climb the rafters, settling like soft wings. You feel the weight of fatigue slipping into your shoulders. The barracks vibrates faintly as the wind pushes against the timbers. The stove hums softly, its glow pulsing with a steady rhythm. Your breathing deepens. The wool blanket warms around your face. The straw mattress presses gently beneath your spine. You hear the muffled harmony of soldiers drifting into sleep. And as the night settles over the fort, you allow yourself to sink into rest, held by the quiet resilience of barracks built to face the fiercest storms. You leave the fort at first light, stepping into a world muffled by white silence. The storm has eased, yet the cold remains sharp enough to sting the inside of your nose with every breath. You walk until the plains flatten into a lonely stretch of land dotted with brittle grasses poking through the drifts. In the distance stands a single homestead half swallowed by snow, the roofline uneven and the porch barely visible. No smoke rises from the chimney. No voices stir the air. Tonight you will learn how someone completely alone on the frontier endured winter nights tending her own fire, rationing her own wood, and sleeping beside the quiet ache of solitude. You push open the door gently. The room inside smells faintly of cold ash and wool. A widow lives here, though you do not see her at first. The interior is modest, containing only the most necessary belongings. A rocking chair sits near the hearth. A woven rug covers part of the plank floor. A small iron stove occupies the corner where the room narrows. You hear soft movement from the far end where a narrow bed rests beneath a handmade quilt. The woman rises slowly when she notices you. Her hair is tied back neatly, though fatigue shadows her eyes. She offers a nod of welcome and gestures toward the stove. You approach grateful for the faint warmth radiating from inside. Several pieces of firewood rest on the floor beside the stove, each one carefully chosen and stacked. The meticulous arrangement catches your attention. Diaries from homesteaders often reveal how people living alone measured firewood with near mathematical precision during storms because each log could determine how long warmth lasted through the night. You take a seat near the stove. The widow moves with steady purpose, lifting the stove lid and adding a small sliver of wood. She closes it gently as if afraid to disturb the fragile warmth. The fire brightens slightly, its glow spilling across her face. Her quiet movements evoke the rhythm of someone who has performed this task 1,000 times. A small mug sits on a nearby shelf. She fills it halfway with warm water from a kettle and hands it to you without a word. The gesture feels generous in a place where every resource must be guarded. You sip slowly, savouring the simple heat. As you set the mug down, a memory surfaces about winter survival practices on isolated homesteads. Some individuals placed hot bricks at the foot of their beds before turning in for the night. The bricks, wrapped in cloth, held heat long enough to ease them into sleep. You glance toward the widow's bedding and notice a cloth-covered shape near the foot, likely one such warming brick. The detail feels intimate, speaking quietly of the rituals that kept people steady in the face of long, cold nights. The widow sits again in her rocking chair. The creak of the wooden runners mingles with the soft crackle of the stove. She pulls a piece of mending into her lap, threading a needle with slow care. Her hands move methodically, each stitch precise. The silence is not uncomfortable. It feels lived in, familiar. You get the sense that she and silence have become companions over the years. You shift on your stool, feeling the warmth seep gradually through your coat. The stove glows softly, its metal warm enough that you extend your hands toward it. Above the stove hangs a small bundle of dried herbs. Traveller's notes from the time often mention how homesteaders hung aromatic plants to freshen the air or soothe the mind. The faint scent drifting from this bundle smells like sage and perhaps a bit of mint. It softens the room's stillness. Outside wind brushes against the walls with a low sigh. Snow rattles against the window pane. The sound is gentle yet relentless. You wrap your blanket around your shoulders and let your gaze wander over the room. Every object is placed with intention. A broom leans against the corner. A pair of boots stands neatly by the door. A few books rest on a shelf, their spines faded but cared for. A small moment of hesitation touches your thoughts when you notice the woodpile. It is modest, almost worryingly so. People living alone often rationed firewood with extraordinary caution, sometimes allowing the temperature inside to drop nearly to freezing before adding another log. Researchers today sometimes differ in their interpretations of how precarious these situations were. Some ratings suggest individuals adapted to extreme cold with surprising resilience. Others imply grey vulnerability when storms stretched for days. Looking around this modest room, you sense how both interpretations could be true. The widow stops sewing and moves toward the stove once more. She adjusts the kettle, stirring the embers with a thin iron rod. Her movements have a soft grace, the quiet efficiency of someone whose life has been shaped by necessity. When she sits again, she smiles faintly, offering a warmth more stable than the one in the stove. You stand and move toward the bed at her gesture. It is narrow and simple, but the quilt covering it is beautiful in its own way. Patterns sewn from scraps of shirts, dresses, and flour sacks form a patchwork of memories stitched together. You sit carefully, running your fingers over the fabric. It is soft, worn smooth by years of use. She adds another sliver of wood to the stove. The fire brightens again, pushing back the cold, creeping through the walls. You lie down on the bed, pulling the quilt over your shoulders. The warmth gathers quickly, especially near the brick wrapped at your feet. The sensation brings relief that spreads upward through your legs. The widow hums a quiet tune as she tidies the room. It is gentle, steady, carrying a calm courage that feels older than the winter outside. You close your eyes for a moment, letting that melody settle around you. The stove crackles, the wind murmurs, the rocking chair moves in slow arcs. You curl onto your side beneath the quilt. The warmth feels fragile but real. The loneliness in the room is softened by presence rather than amplified by it. You breathe slowly, letting your body sink into the mattress. As the widow dims the lantern, shadows bloom gently along the walls. The room grows quiet except for the whisper of fire. You feel the quilt's weight press comfortingly across your chest. Your breathing slows, the warmth at your feet spreads more fully, and in the small determined home of a woman who has weathered too many storms alone, you drift into a sleep shaped by quiet resilience, steady hands, and the simple comfort of shared warmth. You leave the widow's homestead behind, the warmth of her small stove fading as the wind resumes its slow, icy insistence. The prairie stretches ahead in long, pale bands, the snow rippling like fabric pulled tight by invisible hands. You keep your hood low and your boots steady as you follow a faint line carved into the drifts by hooves and sled runners. After an hour of walking, a tall shape materializes ahead. A rider, a horse, a sled strapped behind. You realize you've come upon a frontier mail carrier, one of the relentless travelers who delivered letters across frozen miles no matter how fierce the storm. Tonight, you will learn how these carriers rested, if they rested at all, during the deadly blizzards that tested every bone in their bodies. The rider sees you and waves you closer. His face is wrapped in wool except for his eyes, which reveal exhaustion woven with determination. He gestures toward a small grove of willow trees ahead. You follow him into the cluster where the wind calms and the trees create a pocket of stillness. His sled is covered with a heavy tarp, bulging at the edges, filled with tightly bound mail sacks. He motions for you to help lift the tarp, and you see the narrow sleeping niche carved beneath the bags. He pulls out 2 wool blankets and spreads them across a bed of dried reeds he gathered earlier. You kneel to feel the reeds. They are surprisingly soft, holding a bit of warmth from earlier sunlight. Frontier correspondence from the era confirms that mail carriers often stole moments of rest beneath their sleds or inside hastily scraped snow hollows, relying on whatever scraps of softness they could gather to keep cold from soaking upward. The rider removes a bean tin from his saddlebag and shakes it. A few rattling sounds inside tell you there is something edible left. He taps the tin with a gloved knuckle, offering half to you before he sets the rest aside for later. The gesture, small but sincere, speaks of the unspoken camaraderie shared by people who face the winter together. As he settles onto the reed mat, a faint fragrance rises from it. You recognize the scent of dried willow bark. Some travellers use the bark not only for padding, but for its mild, soothing aroma. One of the more unconventional habits described in certain personal journals involved chewing small pieces to ease aches after long rides, though it is unclear how effective the practice truly was. The smell alone feels comforting, a tiny warmth tucked inside the cold. The rider adjusts the tarp so it hangs like a slanted roof, shielding you both from the falling snow. The space beneath becomes surprisingly insulated. You feel the wind soften as the willow branches sway gently overhead. You take your place beside the reed bed, spreading your own blanket across your legs. The rider begins unwrapping a heated stone he kept nestled inside a cloth near his chest. He sets it between the blankets, and immediately you feel a faint pulse of warmth. Travellers' accounts consistently highlight the value of these warmed stones, often heated near small fires built whenever time and weather allowed. Tonight the warmth they offer feels like a lifeline braided from the simplest materials. Snow gathers along the outer edge of the tarp, forming a soft wall that blocks even more wind. The light filtering through becomes dim and muted. You can hear the storm but no longer feel its direct bite. The horse stands nearby, its head lowered, breath swirling in slow clouds. The animal's presence provides an odd sense of companionship. Even without words, it feels like part of your small winter shelter. You pull your blanket tighter and glance at the mail carrier. He leans back against the mail sacks, allowing his body to relax in slow increments. His shoulders drop. His breath steadies. He closes his eyes briefly before opening them again with a faint jolt, as if reminding himself that sleep is as risky as it is necessary. The challenges of sleep for mail carriers appear frequently in period letters. Surviving accounts suggest that these riders rarely slept more than a few minutes at a time during storms, choosing instead to rest in small bursts that kept them warm enough and aware enough to avoid freezing. You can feel the truth of that now. Your own eyelids grow heavy, but instinct pushes them open again. The rider adjusts his blanket around his legs. He reaches into his coat and pulls out a small notebook containing route notes and delivery times. The handwriting is tight and efficient, as though every second spent writing must be earned by hours of travel. He tucks the notebook away and exhales softly. You hear him mutter something about the northern trail splitting in two because of drifting snowbanks. He is trying to decide whether to wait for dawn or push forward while the wind remains manageable. The responsibility he feels weighs heavily even inside this tiny pocket of warmth. You shift your position, pressing your back against a mail sack. Its canvas is cold but sturdy. The weight of the sealed letters inside feels symbolic, like hundreds of small voices waiting to be carried through the cold. You trace a gloved hand along the surface, imagining the distant families who rely on this carrier to keep them connected. Outside, the wind changes pitch. It becomes deeper, more insistent. Snow brushes the tarp in soft waves. You feel the temperature dip slightly. The warmed stone still provides faint comfort, but you tuck the blanket closer around your chin for added heat. Interpretive studies continue to diverge when evaluating exactly how mail carriers balance the need for rest with the danger of hypothermia. Some analyses suggest they maintained constant motion stopping only when absolutely necessary. Others argue that strategic short rests like this were vital to maintaining stamina. Listening now to the soft rhythm of the rider's breath, you sense that rest, however brief, is an essential thread in survival. The air grows quieter inside your shelter. The snow deepens around the edges, thickening the insulation. Your own breath fogs gently. Your fingers warm slowly beneath the blanket. You close your eyes and let the stillness sink deeper into your chest. The willow branches sway overhead like muted harp strings. The horse shifts its weight, hooves crunching faintly. The tarp gathers another layer of snow, softening the light even further. The world narrows into this reed-lined cradle. You breathe slowly. The warmth from the stones spreads toward your knees. The blanket grows heavier with shared heat. The mail carrier's breathing evens out beside you, and though the storm prowls just beyond the willow grove, you drift into a half-sleep shaped by exhaustion, quiet grit, and the delicate balance between stopping long enough to rest and waking soon enough to survive. You part ways with the mail carrier at dawn, his horse already shifting restlessly as he prepares to vanish into the pale swirl of the northern trail. The storm loosens its hold just enough for you to see a faint horizon, but the cold sharpens with every breath. You walk southward, guided by nothing more than instinct and the slight dip in the land that hints at a riverbed. After several hours, distant shapes begin to move against the snow. Cattle, a front of shaggy bodies pushing slowly across the frozen plain, and with them the silhouettes of drovers huddled in heavy coats. You have stumbled upon a cattle drive, forced to make cold camp during an unexpected blizzard. Tonight you will learn how these men slept under open sky when weather turned vicious without warning. One of the drovers spots you and waves you closer. His face is red from wind and his hat is crusted with frost. He points toward a stand of scrubby junipers where several cowboys have gathered. Their horses are tethered close by breath, rising from their muzzles in thick clouds. You approach the group, feeling the sting of cold along your ears as the wind shifts direction. A fire burns low between a ring of stones. It is no bigger than a dinner plate, barely enough to warm hands, let alone bodies. Yet the cowboys crouch near it with practiced ease. They nod for you to join them, and you settle on a patch of snow trampled flat by boots. One cowboy hands you a coil of rope to sit on so the cold ground will not steal your heat too quickly. Frontier journals written by drovers consistently reveal how such small barriers against frozen earth mattered immensely during long nights on the open range. You wrap your blanket tight around your chest as a cowboy stirs the embers with a stick. The fire brightens briefly, sending a warm flicker across the group. The smell of charred wood mixes with the earthy scent of cattle, drifting from beyond the junipers. A second fire, equally small, glows several yards away, where a pair of riders stand watch over the herd. Their silhouettes sway gently in the dimness. One of the cowboys unrolls a bedroll onto the snow. It consists of 2 layers of canvas wrapped around a heavy wool blanket. He thumps the canvas with his glove, explaining that it is stiff from frost but still serviceable. You help him spread it flat. The blanket inside is thick and slightly damp along the edges, but the inner layer feels warm where his body heat lingers. He pats the space beside him, inviting you to lay out your own bedding in the sheltered curve of the juniper branches. You arrange your bedroll on a similar patch of trampled snow. The ground beneath is brutally cold, but the canvas offers some protection. You sit down to test the surface and feel the snow crunch beneath. The cowboy beside you drains a last sip of coffee from a tin cup, then turns it upside down to shake out ice crystals forming at the bottom. As you prepare to lie down, a curious bit of frontier wisdom surfaces in your mind. Some drovers swore that sleeping with their saddles tucked against their backs helped block the wind and created a convenient slope to trap heat. Other cowboys insisted the trick was more superstition than science, yet you notice several saddles propped behind bedrolls around the camp. The practice clearly had its believers. A gust of wind sweeps around the cluster of junipers, rattling branches and tossing sparks from the small fire. The cattle low in the distance, their voices muffled by the snow-laden air. One cowboy rises, checks his horse's cinch, and then returns to his blanket. He mutters that the herd may spook if the wind changes direction. You feel the tension beneath his words. On nights like these, men slept lightly, always listening for the sound of hooves pounding into panic. You lie back on your bedroll, pulling the canvas flap tightly over your chest. The blanket beneath you begins to retain your body heat. In the dim firelight, your breath forms little halos that drift upwards before disappearing. A cowboy across from you removes a small pouch from his coat and unwraps a piece of jerky. He offers you a strip. The flavour is smoky and tough, requiring slow chewing that warms your jaw. Overhead, the sky tightens into a mass of slate grey. The clouds shift with restless energy. The cattle shuffle and stamp the ground, sending faint tremors through the frozen earth. Drover accounts from the era frequently mention how nights on the open range felt more awake than asleep. Rest came in scattered fragments, rarely in long stretches. You absorb that truth now as the wind brushes your face and the fire pops beside your boots. The cowboy next to you pulls his hat low over his eyes. He explains softly that their drive was supposed to pass this area days earlier, but the first storm forced them to slow, and now the second storm has pinned them entirely. He pulls the edge of his blanket tighter and leans into the slight hollow he dug into the snow. It is a small depression, barely noticeable, but it helps block the wind. A tiny piece of technique, yet a difference maker. Across the camp, two men argue quietly about whether the wind will shift south by midnight. Their conversation drifts toward uncertainty. Analysts who study frontier weather patterns often reach incompatible readings of the accounts drovers left behind. Some writings emphasize storms arriving from predictable directions, while others stress sudden shifts that confounded even the most seasoned cowboys. Listening to the disagreement, now you sense how unpredictable the prairie sky could be. Your body starts to relax, warmed by the layers beneath you. You tuck your hands beneath your coat and curl your knees slightly. The junipers sway gently, their shadows dancing in flickers from the fire. The cattle's low murmurs blend with the wind, forming a rhythm that feels strangely lulling. A cowboy to your left begins humming a tune. It is low and slow, something heard by countless herds over countless nights. The sound settles over the camp like a thin blanket. Another cowboy joins him quietly, their voices weaving through the cold. Your eyelids grow heavy. The warmth inside your bedroll pulls around your chest and stomach. The fire hums softly. A horse snorts nearby. Snow drifts down in delicate flakes, settling along the canvas covering your shoulder. The storm drifts across the plains, relentless but distant enough to grant this camp a fragile peace. And within this circle of cowhands, cattle and canvas, you finally ease into sleep. A sleep shaped by shared fires, cold breath, soft humming, and the steady presence of the herd that always surrounds the night. You rise from the cattle camp with stiff limbs and canvas still crusted with frost, the hum of the herd fading behind you as you walk toward the distant outline of mountains. Their white ridges loom like frozen waves, rising higher with every step you take. The wind sharpens the closer you draw, carving sudden currents down the slopes that swirl snow across the valley floor. By midday, you are winding your way into a narrow pass, the terrain steep on both sides, the sky tightening into a slate ceiling overhead. Tonight, you will learn how travellers crossing mountain passes sought rest in the most unforgiving heights, sleeping in shelters scraped from rock ice and whatever meagre materials they carried. You continue climbing until a rocky outcrop appears, jutting from the slope like a fractured tooth. The wind slams against it in strong bursts, then quiets for a heartbeat before rising again. Beneath the ledge lies a shallow recess sheltered from the worst of the gusts. You make your way toward it, boots slipping on patches of ice. Inside the nook you find scattered remnants of old fire rings and a few scraps of charcoal. The marks speak quietly of earlier travellers who paused here waiting for storms to ease. You brush snow from the ground and begin arranging your bedding in the small shelter. The stone beneath is unforgiving cold enough to numb your fingers even through your gloves. Notes kept by explorers who crossed these ranges consistently highlight the importance of creating a barrier between the body and the stone. You gather dry branches poking from beneath the snow, breaking them into a thin lattice that raises your bedroll slightly off the rock. It is not comfortable, but it will blunt the worst of the cold. The wind moans against the cliff face. Snow curls into your shelter in delicate spirals. You tug your blanket into your lap, then pull your coat tighter. The mountain air feels sharper, more brittle than the storms on the plains. Every breath enters your lungs like chipped glass. You kneel near the wall and notice an unusual mark etched into the rock, perhaps scratched there by earlier travellers. The groove forms a small circular symbol. It brings to mind a little-known detail from mountaineer accounts. Some highland travellers carried small tokens carved from bone or stone, placing them near their makeshift camps to encourage good weather or steady footing. Whether such gestures shaped their confidence or were simply a quiet ritual, they lingered in personal writings with surprising consistency. You lean back against the stone, feeling its icy firmness through your coat. The sky darkens and the wind changes pitch. Snow begins to fall in thick flakes drifting sideways across the pass. You realize quickly why the mountains were feared by so many. A storm up here moves faster, bites deeper, and leaves no space for error. You set a small fire using the branches you gathered. The flame is weak at first, but with patience and a few sparks from your flint, it grows into a small, determined glow. Its warmth spreads only a few feet, but the effect is immediate. Your fingertips loosen. Your breath steadies. You place your boots nearer the flame, careful not to scorch them. Travellers often wrote that warming boots before sleep prevented stiffened leather from becoming impossible to wear in the morning. The firelight flickers across the rock ceiling. Long shadows stretch like softened brush strokes. You settle down on your bedroll, tucking your legs beneath the blanket. The branches beneath you crackle slightly, shifting under your weight. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle lift the lattice provides. A deep rumble rolls across the mountainside. Not thunder exactly, but something heavier. Maybe shifting snow. Maybe a distant rock slide. Explorers' journals repeatedly point out how mountain passes could play tricks on sound-bouncing noises from peak to peak until travellers could not determine direction. You listen carefully, trying to locate the source, but the sound dissolves into the wind. The fire flares briefly before quieting. You pull your blanket up to your chin. A few flakes of snow drift through the shelter opening, melting upon your coat. The air around you grows colder as the evening advances. Nearby, your small fire casts enough glow to reveal a partial footprint in the snow. It looks old, softened at the edges. Perhaps another traveller rested here days ago. Perhaps weeks. You run your gloved hand along the mark, imagining someone lying here beneath this same ledge, seeking warmth against the relentless cold. Your shelter creaks softly as the wind presses against the outer wall. You angle your body away from the entrance, letting the rock block as much cold as possible. A few travellers' notes stored in regional collections indicate that some past crossers slept with their packs pressed tightly against their backs to serve as makeshift windbreaks. You shift your own pack behind you and feel its presence soften the draft. Still, there remains persistent uncertainty in mountaineering histories about how much sleep people truly achieved in such exposed environments. Some accounts praise the protective stillness of rock shelters, while others portray these nights as nearly sleepless vigils interrupted by wind, cold, and the constant fear of avalanches. You feel both realities as you settle deeper into your blankets. The flame lowers into glowing embers. They pulse with faint red light that reflects on the icy stone. The warmth they provide is thin but steady. You curl your hands beneath the blanket, pulling them into your chest. The cold remains but loses some of its bite. Your eyes grow heavy. The storm outside rises again, brushing the ledge with sheets of wind. Snow drifts in soft piles near your boots. The world dims to a muted blue. You lie back, fully listening to the mountain's breath. The wind whistles through distant crevices. The stone beneath you holds its ancient chill. Yet within this narrow shelter carved from rock and necessity, you find a thin thread of safety. You close your eyes, drawing the blanket snug around your shoulders. The fire hums quietly. The wind chants along the cliffs, and in the heart of the pass you drift into a fragile sleep shaped by height cold and the rough quiet of the mountains. You descend from the rocky shelter at dawn, the mountain air so sharp it feels like it could carve lines along your cheeks. The sky hangs low over the peaks, and the wind funnels through the pass in long, icy breaths. As you move downward, the terrain softens into stretches of pine and snow-packed ridges. Eventually you spot flickers of movement in the distance, torches, several figures advancing in a tight formation, snowshoes strapped to their feet. A rescue party. Their faces are set with quiet purpose, their packs heavy with provisions. These are the men who combed the frontier for stranded travellers, pausing only when storms made movement impossible. Tonight you will sleep as they did in a camp meant not for comfort, but for readiness. They greet you with firm nods and guide you toward a sheltered stand of fir trees. The branches bend beneath the snow, forming a natural canopy that blocks the worst of the wind. A shallow clearing opens beneath the tallest tree where the group has already begun preparing their temporary camp. One of them hands you a flat wooden shovel, motioning for you to help carve a windbreak from the snow. You join them, scooping and smoothing packed snow into low-curved walls. As you work, you notice that the ground beneath the trees feels slightly warmer, softened by fallen needles. Field notes recorded by search teams in the late 19th century often highlight how forest floors provided a faint thermal advantage compared to open plains. The layers of organic debris trapped small pockets of warmth that made nighttime rest marginally less brutal. The men arrange their gear with quick efficiency. One clears a patch of ground while another packs down snow to create a firm base for bedding. Someone else begins slicing dried meat for a simple meal. You move closer to the fire pit they have started forming. Branches snap beneath your boots, releasing scents of pine and resin into the air. While they prepare, one of the rescuers pulls from his pack a curious little object, a small pouch filled with crushed spruce needles. He sprinkles a bit into the fire when it catches. A bright fragrance blooms instantly. A detail tucked into a few remote rescue logs describes this practice as a way to keep the air fresh during long, tense nights. Whether it worked as intended or simply lifted morale, the effect is surprisingly pleasant. The fire grows flickering against the snow walls. A soft orange glow falls across the rescuers' faces. Their expressions carry fatigue but also determination. These men sleep lightly because their purpose demands it. Someone somewhere might be lost, buried, or stranded, and every hour matters. You help lay down a mat of fir boughs for sleeping. Their needles create a cushioned surface that lifts you away from the icy ground. Accounts written by members of frontier rescue teams consistently emphasize the importance of these bough beds, describing how they reduced heat loss and provided enough resilience to make a few hours of rest possible. The group eats in silence, sharing small portions of dried meat and bread hardened by cold. A pot of broth warms over the fire. A rescuer ladles some into a tin cup and hands it to you. The liquid is thin but warming, settling into your chest like a slow ember. As the meal ends, one of the men begins sharpening a tool with slow rhythmic strokes. Another adjusts the straps of his snowshoes. A few reorganize their packs, preparing for any call to move at a moment's notice. Yet there is also an undercurrent of quiet leisure, the kind born of necessity. Waiting is part of their work. When you settle into your spot on the fir boughs, the canopy above sways gently. Snow dusts downward in soft sprinkles. You draw your blanket across your body, shaping it tightly around your shoulders. The fire's warmth meets the cold air halfway, forming a delicate balance of comfort. As the night deepens, a discussion emerges among the rescuers regarding a trail reportedly buried under several feet of snow. Their voices carry a note of uncertainty. Studies examining records of search efforts from this era reveal notable inconsistencies in how deep winter storms altered commonly used paths. Some sources describe drifts rising higher than a rider's chest, while others mention only knee-high obstacles. The evidence remains too uneven for modern experts to construct a perfectly clear picture. You shift your body slightly, feeling the fir boughs shift with you. The needles form a soft cradle beneath your ribs. A rescuer near you hums a quiet tune, turning rhythm into warmth. The fire crackles, sending tiny sparks upward. Wind sweeps around the snow wall in muted gusts. The forest branches bow and rustle gently, creating a layered chorus of sound. The rescuers settle slowly, some lying back on their bough beds, others keeping partial watch with jackets pulled tight. The camp breathes in unison, a soft rhythm of preparation and rest intertwined. You curl deeper into your blanket. The warmth of the fire still reaches your feet, though faintly. Your breath forms small clouds that drift above you before merging with the cold air. The rescuers speak no final words. They simply ease into stillness, knowing the night may call for movement at any moment. Your eyelids lower. The scent of pine deepens. Snow continues its soft descent through the branches. In this quiet clearing of watchful sleepers, you drift into a light but steady rest, held by fire fir needles and the shared vigilance of those who roam the winter to find the lost. You part ways with the rescue party before sunrise, their lanterns bobbing like tiny stars as they vanish into the trees. The storm loosens its grip once again, softening into a steady drift of powder that whispers across the frozen ground. You follow a winding path through scattered pines until faint shapes emerge ahead. Buildings. Not many and not sturdy, but enough to signal the edge of a small frontier town. Smoke trickles from a few chimneys and dim lights glow behind frosted windows. You draw closer and recognize one structure immediately, a frontier hotel, more promise than reality. Tonight you will slip into the drafty corners of this place and learn how travelers slept when comfort was advertised but rarely delivered. The hotel stands 2 stories tall, built of mismatched boards that creak even before you touch the door. You step inside and find yourself in a narrow lobby warmed by a modest potbelly stove. The heat is mild at best, but it feels like a blessing after the cold outside. A man behind the counter nods at you, his hair wild from lack of sleep. He hands you a key and gestures toward the stairs. The stair treads groan beneath your boots as you climb. The hallway above is dim, lit by a single lantern that casts long shadows along the crooked floorboards. You find your room and let yourself in. The door closes with a sound more like a sigh than a latch. Inside, the space is cramped and cold. Frost rims the small window, the wallpaper curls at the edges. A single bed sits in the corner, its frame metal, and its mattress thin enough to feel the boards beneath. You drop your pack and sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress shifts unevenly. Notes left by 19th century travellers staying in such hotels repeatedly mention how the bedding was often lumpy, flattened, or filled with straw that had not been changed in far too long. It was a far cry from the comfort travellers hoped for, yet for many it was better than sleeping outside. You lift the wool blanket. It is heavy and smells faintly of old soap and dust. The pillow is small, nearly flat. You fluff it, though your efforts do little to improve its shape. You breathe in the cold air, tasting a faint hint of damp wood. A scraping sound draws your attention toward the window. Drafts push around the frame, sending ribbons of cold air into the room. You move closer and press your palm against the glass. The cold seeps instantly into your skin. You notice bits of fabric stuffed along the sill, likely placed there by earlier guests attempting to block the wind. Travellers often resorted to such quick fixes, wedging scraps of clothing or paper into the cracks to steal a few degrees of warmth from winter. You find a spare piece of cloth in your pack and push it into a gap near the hinge. The draft softens somewhat. It is not perfect, but in a place like this, perfection is something no one expects. A knock sounds faintly through the thin wall. Someone coughs in the next room. Another guest mutters to himself. You hear footsteps creaking overhead. The building seems alive with tiny noises. Period letters and journals describe frontier hotels as hubs of restless sound, where every board transmitted the movements of strangers. Privacy was a luxury no one found. You sit again on the bed and pull back the blanket. The fabric feels coarse as you slide beneath it. The cold mattress presses against your legs, stealing warmth at first. You curl your body, drawing your knees toward your chest. A small wash basin sits on the bedside table. The water inside has formed a thin layer of ice. You break it with your finger, the crack echoing in the quiet room. A common note from hotel registers of the time reveals that frozen wash water in the mornings was considered entirely normal during blizzards. No one expected these buildings to keep the cold out fully. You turn toward the lantern on the wall. Its flame flickers as another gust presses against the window. The room glows in soft amber light, warming the space visually, even if not physically. You imagine travellers sitting just as you are now, telling themselves that warmth was partly a matter of mindset. You stretch your legs beneath the blanket. The mattress softens slightly as your body heat spreads. You shift your coat to serve as a bit of extra padding beneath your lower back. One of the more unconventional strategies described in scattered notes from period travellers involves sleeping on top of their coats to soften the thin mattress. You feel the benefit immediately. Outside the window, snowflakes drift gently downward, reflecting moonlight in faint silver glimmers. You listen to the storm's quiet voice muted by the hotel walls. The sound is softer than the storms you've slept through before, but still unrelenting. You pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. The room's temperature drops with each passing minute, but your body begins to create a small pocket of warmth. You curl deeper into it. The bed frame creaks softly beneath you. From the hallway, a whisper of conversation rises, then fades. A floorboard groans. Someone laughs faintly, perhaps, in response to a story told too loudly. Historians examining the social life of such hotels often note how thin walls facilitated unintended intimacy, connecting travellers through muffled exchanges whether they wished it or not. Tonight you feel that closeness in the subtle presence of other lives drifting towards sleep. You turn onto your side, letting the blanket fall smoothly along your back. The pillow yields just enough to cradle your cheek. The lantern dimming outside your door signals that the hotel keeper has retired for the night. Shadows stretch across the crooked floorboards, filling the room with a quieter, calmer tone. You exhale slowly. The cold persists, but your blanket traps more warmth now. The mattress feels firmer under your hips as the coat provides relief. The sounds around you soften. The building seems to settle into its own form of slumber. Your eyelids grow heavy. You tuck the blanket beneath your chin, blocking the last of the drafts. The faint aroma of old wool lingers in the air. And in this humble hotel room, imperfect yet protective, you drift into a traveller's rest. A rest held by thin walls, soft lantern light, and the fragile comfort that even the coldest frontier nights could not fully take away. You leave the Frontier Hotel at dawn, your breath curling into the still air like pale silk. The world is muted again, wrapped in a blanket of drifting snow that softens every edge. As you walk east along a half-buried fence line, you notice a structure ahead with a square, simple roof line barely visible beneath the storm's remnants. A schoolhouse. Small, lonely, and utterly quiet. Yet a faint glow flickers behind its frosted windows, hinting that someone knows you're coming. Tonight, you will discover how teachers and children once sheltered together in these one-room buildings when blizzard struck without warning. You push open the schoolhouse door. A gust of warm air brushes your face, scented with chalk wool and faint traces of lamp oil. Inside, rows of wooden desks stand like small soldiers facing the blackboard. A tall iron stove sits in the centre of the room, glowing with steady heat. A teacher stands near it, adjusting the damper. She turns and greets you with a soft nod, her face drawn with fatigue yet steady with calm resolve. A handful of children huddle near the stove, wrapped in quilts and extra coats. Some sit on benches with their knees tucked up. Others share blankets in groups of 2 or 3. Their soft chatter fills the room with warmth that has nothing to do with fire. The teacher gestures to an open space near the stove and offers you a spare blanket. You accept it gratefully, letting the wool settle across your shoulders. You study the room more closely. The walls are lined with small shelves holding primer slates and a few jars filled with dried ink powder. A map of the United States hangs near the entrance, its edges curled from years of handling. Written recollections from rural instructors of the era frequently emphasize how schoolhouses doubled as emergency shelters when families could not risk sending children home in sudden storms. The buildings were simple, but reliable. their thick walls and central stoves providing steady heat. You join the children near the stove. The warmth on your shins feels wonderful after the long walk. A boy beside you offers a chipped cup of warm water heated earlier on the stove. The cup trembles slightly in his cold hands. You thank him and take a slow sip, feeling life return to your throat. As you settle onto a bench, a small detail catches your eye. Near the windowsill, someone has hung a strip of oiled cloth. It flutters slightly with each draft. One of the more unconventional methods documented in a few rural accounts involved hanging these cloth strips to catch cold air and guide it downward, reducing the direct chill on the room's occupants. Whether the technique worked consistently is uncertain, but here the cloth does seem to tame the draft. The teacher moves quietly between the children, adjusting blankets and checking the stove. She places an additional log inside, closing the iron door carefully to maintain a steady burn. She kneels beside a girl who cannot stop shivering and wraps a second quilt around her shoulders. Her expression is calm, her movements precise. You sense her fatigue, but also her fierce responsibility. Snow taps softly at the windows like small fingertips. The storm outside thickens again, swirling into new force. You hear it pressing against the wooden boards, the sound both restless and rhythmic. The children glance toward the noise but do not seem frightened. The schoolhouse has likely carried them through storms before. You stretch your legs and notice the wooden floor beneath your boots feels warm near the stove but grows colder toward the edges of the room. Teachers' memoirs from that period often mention a constant dance between heat and cold, with the stove offering strong warmth in one spot while frosty drafts snuck through cracks near the roof or the floorboards. You feel that contrast clearly now. The children settle into quieter voices. Some nibble on cold biscuits stored in their pockets. Others read from small books or try to keep their hands warm by rubbing them together. The teacher hands you a thicker quilt and motions for you to lie on one of the longer benches. You obey, grateful for her hospitality. As you stretch out on the bench, the room's soft glow eases something inside you. The wooden bench is hard beneath your back, but the quilt's weight softens the discomfort. A lantern flickers in the corner, casting warm ripples of light across the blackboard, where earlier lessons still linger in faint chalk lines. The teacher speaks to the children in a calm tone, telling them stories from memory. They listen with wide eyes, leaning closer in their blankets. Her voice carries gently through the room, rising and falling, like a lullaby shaped from winter resolve. Her story shifts into a tale about a figure who braves storms with courage and kindness. The children smile. You close your eyes briefly, letting her voice soften the edges of the cold world. A faint groan creaks through the ceiling as the wind changes. You open your eyes again, watching as frost spreads further along the window panes. The patterns bloom like branching feathers, delicate yet fierce. Notes written by visiting inspectors often mention how frost reached several inches thick on schoolhouse windows during the worst storms, blocking out light almost entirely. One child asks quietly if the storm will last all night. The teacher answers softly but with assurance, saying that storms pass eventually, and they will stay warm together until morning. The room settles into peaceful acceptance. The children lean against one another or curl deep under their quilts. The fire pops in the stove. A warm pulse travels through the room. You shift beneath your quilt, feeling your body loosen into the bench. The cold in the corners of the schoolhouse no longer feels threatening, just distant. A small group of children forms a circle around the teacher, laying their heads on rolled-up coats or books wrapped in cloth. The resourcefulness of these makeshift pillows reflects a rarely highlighted truth. Frontier children slept wherever warmth gathered, often improvising comfort with whatever objects they carried. Outside, the storm's voice deepens. The wind whistles through the trees and snow scratches faintly at the wooden steps. The lantern light flickers again, painting gentle shadows across the ceiling. The teacher dims the lantern slightly, encouraging the children to rest. She sits near the stove blanket, wrapped around her shoulders, eyes alert but softened. You admire her steadiness. Teachers in remote regions often bore immense responsibility, serving as caretakers and guardians during storms. Some studies based on preserved diaries suggest that these long nights forged powerful bonds between teachers and students, though interpretations vary depending on the region. You turn onto your side, resting your head on your folded coat. The quilt presses softly against your cheek. Warmth gathers around your chest. The murmur of the children grows faint. The steady hum of the stove settles into a gentle rhythm. Your breathing slows. The frost patterns shimmer faintly in lamplight. The scent of wool and chalk drifts through the room. And within this humble schoolhouse shaped by quiet strength and shared warmth, you slip into a sleep carried by soft voices, steady fire, and the comforting truth that no one faces the storm alone tonight. You leave the schoolhouse behind as the storm softens into a gentle hush, drifting across the open land like a slow exhale. The sky brightens slightly, though the sun remains hidden behind pale clouds. You follow a half-buried trail until a distant rumble vibrates through the snow. A long, low silhouette emerges on the horizon, dark against the white. A train, or rather a train that is no longer moving. By the time you reach it, the locomotive sits half buried in drifts, its iron sides glazed with ice. Tonight you'll learn how passengers slept aboard stranded rail cars when winter storms halted progress and left them suspended between nowhere and distant hopes. You approach the nearest car and pull yourself up the frozen steps. The metal railing bites at your gloves. Inside, the air is dim and thick with a scent of wool soot and breath. Lanterns hang from hooks along the walls, casting deep amber light across rows of passengers huddled beneath blankets. A conductor raises his head and nods toward an empty seat near the back. You ease into it, brushing snow from your coat as the car sways slightly in the wind. The benches are narrow, cushioned only by thin padding that has long since flattened. The passengers around you pull their coats tightly to their chests, each bracing for the long wait. Reports circulated by railway companies at the time frequently describe how blizzards halted trains mid-route, trapping passengers for hours or even days. Coal-for-heating stoves could run low and crews rationed warmth with careful attention to every ember. A stove stands near the centre of the car, glowing faintly. The iron door rattles as the train shifts. People cluster around it, stretching hands toward the fragile warmth. One of the passengers offers you a corner of space beside him. You accept, letting the nearest flicker of heat brush your knees. Your eyes wander along the interior. Frost gathers in delicate webs on the glass windows, swirling into intricate shapes that catch the lantern light. A small child presses her mittened hand to the pane, watching frost bloom beneath her touch. Her mother wraps her arms around her, pulling her close. Their breath mingles in tiny clouds. As you settle against the wooden bench, a somewhat unexpected detail surfaces from a travel diary you once read. During severe delays, passengers sometimes stuffed scarves, shawls, or even newspapers beneath seat cushions to create makeshift insulation, hoping to trap a bit more warmth for sleeping. You notice the edges of old pages sticking out beneath your bench, confirming that earlier travellers here have done the same. The conductor moves down the aisle, checking on passengers with a quiet calmness. He adjusts a lantern's wick, dims another, and ensures the stove's draft remains steady. He tells you the line ahead is blocked by drift taller than a man, and a plough crew will not reach them until morning. Resignation flickers across his face, but so does a thin layer of trust in the routine. Trains stalled often enough in winter that crews developed an instinctive rhythm for keeping fear at bay. A passenger across from you unwraps a small bundle of food and offers dried apples to those nearby. You decline gently, but others accept with grateful nods. The act creates a pocket of warmth deeper than what the stove provides. Shared food, even in small amounts, can shift an entire room's mood. You pull your blanket around yourself and lean back. The bench is harder than you expected. You adjust your coat beneath you for padding, forming a thin cushion. A woman seated on your left explains that she slept on trains often while travelling between towns, and she advises placing a folded scarf at the small of your back to ease the pressure. You thank her and follow the suggestion. The improvement is small, but noticeable. The car rocks gently as wind nudges against its sides. Snow taps at the windows with soft rhythmic strokes. Somewhere near the stove, a man begins humming a low melody familiar enough that several heads lift. The tune flows through the car like a soft tide. Passengers relax incrementally, shoulders lowering, breaths lengthening. Lantern light flickers across the ceiling, casting warm ripples over steel ribs and wooden beams. The conductor takes a moment to tighten a loose hinge near the back door. His lantern reveals a row of worried faces, each softened by exhaustion and the small comfort of being enclosed together rather than outside. You stretch your legs beneath the bench in front of you. The floor feels cold, almost icy. You pull your feet back, placing them closer to the heat rising from the stove. The wooden boards creak as the train adjusts again to the wind's pressure. As the night deepens, conversation fades into soft murmurs. A few passengers whisper stories to pass the time, while others simply close their eyes and lean on one another's shoulders. Many accounts preserved in regional newspapers highlight how such impromptu community formed quickly inside stranded rail cars, with strangers supporting each other through shared anxiety and fatigue. Yet some questions linger. Modern researchers reviewing these scattered recollections often reach differing interpretations regarding how safe passengers truly were during prolonged stalls. Some sources emphasize the reliability of well-maintained heating, while others mention perilously low coal supplies and dangerously cold nights. Sitting here near a stove that glows but does not radiate far, you can sense how both realities might be true. The humming continues. You pull your blanket tighter. The carriage seems to contract around its occupants, everyone drawing inward toward the faint warmth. The lantern light grows softer as the wick burns lower. You shift again, pressing your shoulder to the window frame. The frost is thick now, glowing faintly in the muted lantern light. Your reflection hovers in the glass like a distant ghost. Outside, the world remains a vast blur of white. You close your eyes, letting the swaying of the train lull you. The creak of wooden benches, the hush of whispered voices, the soft pop of the stove's embers, and the slow rhythms of breath around you form a strange symphony. A symphony of people caught together in winter's grip, trusting that morning will bring motion again. Your breathing steadies. The heat around your knees deepens slightly. Someone behind you shifts, and the bench vibrates gently beneath your spine. Wrapped in wool, surrounded by quiet companionship, and sheltered inside a steel carriage surrendered to the storm, you drift into sleep. Sleep carried on soft rocking muted lamplight, and the shared hope that dawn will clear the tracks ahead. You step down from the stranded rail car the next morning with your joints stiff and your breath hanging in frozen wreaths around your face. The storm has weakened, but the sky remains heavy, pressing low upon the land, as though unsure whether to release more snow. You follow a narrow track carved by earlier travellers until the world ahead shifts in strange ways. Buildings emerge from the haze, but they lean crookedly. Windows, shattered roofs, sunken beneath years of weather. A ghost town. Silent, hollow, and barely standing against the cold. Tonight you will sleep in one of its abandoned structures, discovering what rest felt like in places time forgot. The first building you approach was likely a store once, judging by the faded sign half buried beneath ice. You push inside, stepping through a doorway whose hinges moan softly. The interior smells of dust, wind, and wood long untouched. Snow is blown in through broken windows, gathering in delicate piles along the floor. Shelves slant toward the ground like tired shoulders. In the far corner stands an old stove, rusted but still recognizable. You move deeper into the ghost town, seeking a structure with enough shelter to serve as a sleeping place. A small house catches your attention. Its door hangs crookedly, but the roof appears mostly intact. You push the door open and step into a narrow room faintly lit through a single broken window. The air feels colder here, but stiller, more protective. You sense this will do. You begin clearing a patch of floor near the crumbling hearth. Scattered papers crunch beneath your boots, brittle from age. You gather some fallen boards to form a shallow barrier against the draft sneaking under the door. Personal notes from individuals who sheltered in abandoned settlements during winter consistently emphasize how even a crude barrier could make the difference between manageable cold and dangerous chill. You spread your blanket over the floor and shake loose the snow clinging to the fabric. The boards beneath you creak, but they hold your weight. You place your pack beneath your head to serve as a pillow. When you look around, you notice something unusual pinned to the wall under a layer of frost, a weathered scrap of cloth with small beads sewn along its edge. A fragment like this mirrors a curious detail that occasionally appears in accounts from abandoned mining towns. Travellers sometimes found remnants of holiday decorations or personal handiwork left by former residents, small human touches surviving long after the people themselves had gone. Wind rushes through a broken window pane. You stuff part of your scarf into the gap to stop the draft, then drape your coat over the sill for good measure. The cold lessens a bit. The faint comfort feels... You check the old stove. Though rusted, its firebox remains intact. You place a few small pieces of wood inside, scavenged from collapsed furniture nearby. With patient sparks from your flint, a thin flame begins to grow. The fire struggles, but warms the air by a few degrees enough to wrap around your hands in a soft welcome glow. You sit close to the stove and let your breath settle. The room hums faintly with the sound of wind slipping through the town's empty buildings. It is not a lonely sound, but rather one that speaks of long histories weathered quietly layer by layer. Your eyes roam across the room. Old wallpaper hangs in curled strips, revealing wooden planks beneath. A cracked mirror leans against the wall, reflecting a pale imitation of the dim firelight. A small cupboard stands open, containing nothing but the memory of someone's daily life. It feels strange to imagine this home once filled with voices, meals, warmth, conversation. Now the only warmth comes from your small efforts to revive the stove. As you settle your bedding closer to the fire, a slight vibration rustles the floorboards. It might be wind. It might be shifting beams. Travellers who ventured through abandoned settlements often wrote about the eerie sensation that buildings seem to breathe. Interpretations among present-day historians differ sharply regarding how common these quiet structural movements actually were. Some argue that accounts exaggerated for dramatic effect, while others insist such sensations were regular companions in weathered wooden structures. Tonight you feel the phenomenon firsthand. You lie back on your blanket, tucking it around your shoulders. The floor is hard, but the heat creeping from the stove softens the discomfort. You pull your boots beneath the blanket near your hips to keep their leather from stiffening. The air inside the house warms slowly, carrying scents of old wood and faint smoke. Your gaze drifts upward. Along the ceiling, frost has formed intricate patterns that glisten faintly in the flickering firelight. The designs look almost like maps of rivers or sinewy branches expanding and curling as the temperature shifts. You watch them quietly, their beauty unexpected in such a forgotten place. A slight thump echoes through the walls, perhaps a shutter knocking loose, perhaps snow sliding from the roof. The ghost town is alive in its own quiet way. You sense the history held in its beams, and boards the stories left behind like footprints frozen in the drift. You curl onto your side, pulling the blanket close. The stove ticks softly as the metal adjusts to the heat. Your body begins to warm, melting the stiffness from your fingers and toes. The wind outside deepens into a low distant hum, brushing past empty windows and silent door frames. Your breathing slows. The fire's glow dances along the walls, casting shapes that sway in gentle rhythm. Shadows lengthen, merge and fade, forming a slow-moving tapestry of quiet winter light. You exhale once more, sinking deeper into the warmth you created. The ghost town surrounds you without judgment. It simply holds you for the night as it once held others long gone. And here in the hollowed bones of forgotten lives you drift into sleep. A sleep shaped by creaking timbers, faint firelight, and the fragile comfort found inside a place abandoned by everything but the winter. You leave the ghost town, carefully stepping over half-buried planks, and following a narrow ribbon of trail that snakes eastward. The wind moves in low, moaning currents across the plains, lifting powdered snow into thin veils that glide over the ground. The sky hangs close heavy with pale clouds, but the air carries a faint clarity that hints at calmer weather ahead. After some time you notice several silhouettes rising sharply from the horizon. Tall clay chimneys, low walls, a cluster of adobe structures. You have reached a frontier trading post where merchants, travellers and local families once took shelter together, when winter storms turn the world into a white labyrinth. Tonight you will learn how people slept inside thick-walled adobe rooms that offered warmth far beyond what their simple shape suggested. You approach the largest building, its mud plaster faded to soft grey. The thick walls radiate an unexpected steadiness like stored sunlight. You push the heavy wooden door inward and step into a wide room dimly lit by a few low-burning oil lamps. The air is warmer here, softly fragrant with dried peppers, wool blankets, and the faintest hint of something sweet simmering on the hearth. A merchant looks up from a ledger and gestures for you to come closer, offering shelter without hesitation. Several families and travellers sit near the hearth, each wrapped in layers of woven blankets. You join them, taking a spot near a stack of thick floor mats made from reeds and coarse fibres. As you settle onto one, it cushions you with surprising comfort. Records kept by visiting traders from the late 19th century repeatedly highlight how adobe walls held warmth with remarkable efficiency, allowing rooms to retain heat even when the outside air dropped dramatically. You pull your blanket across your shoulders and lean back. The lamplight casts honey-coloured ripples across the room. Shadows dance along the curved edges where ceiling meets wall. A child seated nearby traces shapes in the firelight with her fingers, her face flushed and warm. An elderly woman adjusts a clay pot hanging above the hearth. The steam rising from it carries a sweet, earthy scent. She ladles a small portion into a gourd cup and offers it to you. The drink tastes faintly of warm corn and herbs. As it settles in your stomach, your body relaxes further. Your eyes wander across the room until they settle on a small bundle strung high on a wall peg. The object appears to be a dried gourd filled with something that rattles softly when stirred by the breeze. A curious adaptation recounted in a handful of old trading post notes involves hanging such gourds filled with pebbles or seeds near doors to create a soft sound whenever wind or cold seeped in. The noise helps sleepers remain aware of sudden drafts or door openings without rising fully from warmth. Whether it was widely practiced is unclear, but its gentle rattle feels almost musical. Around you, people speak quietly. A few discuss the storm's path. Others mention supplies to be rationed until travel becomes easier. The atmosphere is calm, grounded by the shared understanding that winter demands patience more than resistance. You stretch your legs, enjoying the sense of warmth pooling along them from the thick mats beneath. The merchant closes his ledger and checks the adobe wall with a practiced palm. His touch lingers as if feeling for hidden cracks or cold spots. Surviving descriptions of frontier adobe homes often note that caretakers monitored their walls closely during storms, because even small fissures could alter how warmth moved through the room. The merchant nods to himself, apparently satisfied, and returns to the hearth. The fire crackles softly. Children settle onto mats beside their parents. A man sitting near the entrance begins gently plucking a small stringed instrument, its tones mellow and soothing. The music threads through the room like a quiet reassurance. A young woman adjusts her blanket and explains softly that adobe dwellings rely on the mass of the walls, rather than elaborate insulation. Their thickness stores daytime heat and releases it slowly throughout the night. Her voice carries the confidence of someone who grew up inside these very rooms. As she talks, the warmth around you begins to feel almost radiative, breathing from the walls themselves. The flames in the hearth shift again. Someone stirs the coals and sparks drift upward. The room brightens briefly before relaxing into warm calm. You sink deeper into your mat, letting the steady heat loosen your shoulders. Outside, the wind strengthens for a moment, whistling through narrow gaps in the wooden door. A thin line of cold air brushes your ankles. You adjust your blanket, tucking it more securely around your legs. A traveller near you shifts closer to the fire, pulling his mat along with him. A child asks his mother whether the storm will return tonight. She answers gently that storms always return, but rooms like this one have seen many winters, and will see many more. Her tone carries assurance. The boy nods and curls beneath his blanket, trusting her completely. The conversation among adults turns towards stories of earlier winters. Someone recalls a night years ago when drifts piled high against the adobe walls, burying half the doorframe. Another remembers when snow blew so hard that the hearth required clearing every hour to keep smoke channels open. Analysts studying such stories today often note that accounts vary widely in severity, producing contrasting views on how protective adobe structures truly were in extreme weather. Listening now, you sense that experiences differed from storm to storm. The fire burns lower as evening deepens, lamplight softens, the warmth from the adobe walls holds steady, embracing the room in a gentle cocoon. You stretch your arm beneath your head, using your forearm as a pillow. The mat beneath your side adjusts softly, its fibres warming rapidly under the shared heat of the room. Slowly the voices fade. A few final whispers drift through the air. Someone laughs quietly. Someone else hums. Eventually even these sounds settle. You close your eyes. The fire's glow paints orange on the inside of your eyelids. The weight of the blanket makes your breathing slower, deeper. The air smells of herbs, smoke, and warm clay. You feel yourself sinking into stillness. The adobe walls cradle the night firm and protective, and in this simple trading post where people gather warmth and patience against winter's breath, you drift into sleep shaped by firelight's shared stories and the ancient steadiness of earth formed into shelter. You leave the adobe trading post behind, the warmth in its thick walls lingering faintly in your memory as you step once more into the cold. The storm has thinned, but the land remains pale and hushed, as though winter has decided to speak more softly for a while. You follow a winding stretch of wagon ruts until the terrain rises slightly, revealing something unexpected ahead. A cluster of canvas tents arranged in a rough semicircle, their shapes rounded by snow. A travelling camp of itinerant craftsmen and traders. You smell faint wood smoke drifting from one tent flap, along with the faint metallic scent of tools. Tonight you will see how these wanderers slept on the move, turning flimsy canvas into nighttime refuge, even in the bitterest storms. You approach the camp slowly. A man steps from one of the tents, brushing snow from his coat. He greets you with a nod and waves you toward the largest tent. You duck inside and find a world entirely different from the white silence outside. The air carries the smell of heated canvas, spilled lamp oil, and simmering broth. A small iron brazier glows in the centre, its coals pulsing with quiet heat. The tent walls curve upward like soft ribs lit faintly by the lantern hanging from a pole. Inside, men and women sit on rolled blankets and crates arranged around the brazier. Some chat in low voices while others mend gear, illuminated by lantern light. You settle onto an empty blanket and feel the canvas beneath it flex slightly. Documentation created by residents of the period makes it clear that such travelling groups relied heavily on interior warmth, generated by shared body heat and modest heating stones, rather than large fires that might damage the tent or risk setting it ablaze. You take off your gloves and warm your hands above the brazier. A woman seated across from you stirs a pot balanced carefully on a metal trivet. Her motions are slow and confident, as though she has cooked meals this way through countless winters. When she lifts the lid, a rich aroma escapes, some kind of stew seasoned with dried herbs and vegetables. She ladles a small bowl and hands it to you with a tired smile. You sip the broth, feeling heat spread through your jaw and chest. The flavour is simple and grounding. As you eat, an elderly man near the entrance lifts a battered tin box, shaking it gently before opening it. Inside are small charcoal pellets wrapped in cloth squares. A small but memorable oddity mentioned in a few travel logs concerns these portable warmers. Some travellers tuck them inside their boots or near their ribs at night to stretch warmth until morning. He offers one to you and you tuck it into your blanket gratefully. The tent shifts as a gust of wind presses against it. Snow slides along the canvas in a soft, continuous whisper. You glance toward the entrance flap, which has been weighted with stones to keep it from blowing open. More stones line the bottom of the tent wall, anchoring the structure against sudden gusts. These details show how carefully the group has prepared for the storm's unpredictability. The man who first greeted you places another scoop of charcoal into the brazier, coaxing more heat upward. The glow brightens, casting deeper gold across the tent's interior. You lie back on your blanket, feeling the canvas cradle your shoulder blades. A few blankets have been stacked nearby to create additional insulation for those who need it. Someone slides one toward your feet and you tuck it more tightly around your legs. Quiet conversations drift around you. One pair of craftsmen discuss repairs needed for a wagon wheel that splintered earlier in the day. Another couple murmurs about the possibility of moving camp in the morning if the storm truly weakens. Their voices intertwine with the soft crackle of the brazier, forming a soothing rhythm. Snow drums softly on the tent roof. The sound grows sharper for a moment, then evens out. A child curled in the corner beneath a thick quilt shifts slightly, sighing with contentment. The warmth in the tent feels fragile yet persistent, as though everyone's breath and body heat are joining forces to create a single gentle climate. A craftsman near your side explains that their tents are lined with multiple layers, canvas outside, then oiled cloth, and sometimes a thin sheet of wool or fur stitched inside. These layers trap heat surprisingly well. Surviving winter correspondence from the region consistently points out that such multi-layer designs allowed groups like this to travel farther into winter seasons than many expected possible. The woman stirring the pot covers it and moves closer to the brazier, wrapping her arms around her knees. Her face softens in the glow. She mutters that the storm might worsen by midnight. Another trader disagrees. Academic viewpoints diverge considerably when evaluating how predictable blizzard patterns truly were in these territories, since different diaries describe wildly different storm behaviours. Listening to the quiet debate, now you hear echoes of that uncertainty. You shift your weight on the blanket. The canvas beneath you radiates faint warmth from the brazier, creating a surprisingly comfortable spot. Someone adjusts the lantern overhead, lowering its flame slightly to conserve oil. Shadows deepen across the tent walls, merging in long, sweeping shapes. You stretch your legs fully and pull the blanket higher over your chest. The charcoal pellet near your ribs continues to radiate gentle heat. Your toes warm gradually, though the air near the tent floor remains cold enough to sting. The craftsmen begin humming a slow tune, perhaps a work song, perhaps something older passed through generations. The melody threads through the tent like a soft current. A few others join in, their voices muted by fatigue but steady. The child in the corner shifts again and nestles deeper under the quilt. Your breathing slows. The tent sways gently with the wind rocking you in slow intervals. Heat gathers beneath your blanket, forming a pocket of comfort that grows wider with every exhale. The brazier pulses with steady warmth like the quiet heartbeat of the camp. You close your eyes. The canvas ceiling glows faintly through your eyelids, lit by lantern light. The murmurs around you soften. The hum of shared warmth settles deeper into the air. And in this canvas haven, shaped by travelling hands and persistent places of refuge, you drift into a warm, steady sleep. A sleep woven from song, glowing coals, and the companionship of wanderers who know how to make shelter wherever the storms find them. You leave the canvas camp after sunrise, stepping back into a world washed pale by drifting snow. The storm has quieted into a soft whisper that moves across the open plains, smoothing every surface it touches. You walk along a gentle slope where the land folds inward, forming shallow depressions that lead toward a cluster of small cabins nestled near a frozen creek. These structures look sturdier than tents, but humbler than full homesteads built with logs stacked carefully and chinked with mud now hardened by winter. Their roofs sag gently under layered snow, and thin trails of smoke curl from several chimneys. You have found a line camp, the kind used by ranch hands, who watched over scattered livestock far from the main ranch house. Tonight you will learn how these solitary watchers slept in remote cabins through blizzards that made the world feel impossibly large. One of the ranch hands opens a door and waves you inward. You step into a narrow cabin lit by the glow of a small iron stove. The air smells of wet wool, dried leather, and faint traces of tobacco. A pair of boots rest near the stove, steaming lightly as they thaw. Two bunks line the far wall, each draped with patchwork quilts faded from years of use. The ranch hand nods toward a wooden stool and gestures for you to warm yourself. You sit near the stove and hold your hands toward its radiating heat. The warmth feels deep and steady. Various first-hand winter journals describe in straightforward terms how line camps depended on small stoves that burned hot and fast, requiring constant attention to keep temperatures survivable. The man beside you adds another log, coaxing the flames higher with practiced familiarity. As your fingers warm, you notice a narrow shelf above the bunks, holding small bundles wrapped in cloth. The ranch hand explains that the bundles contain dried sage and cedar. One surprisingly creative adaptation appears in a scattered handful of accounts. From these camps, some riders burned small sprigs of these plants before sleep, believing the scent kept the air clean and spirits calmer during long isolated nights. Whether it served practical or emotional purposes, the ritual clearly mattered to the people who lived here. You rise to examine the bunks more closely. The lower bunk is covered with a quilt made from repurposed feed sacks, stitched with sturdy, uneven seams. The mattress beneath it is stuffed with straw mixed with dried grasses. The upper bunk holds a thicker blanket dyed a deep reddish brown, the colour softened with age. You touch the fabric gently and feel warmth lingering where someone recently lay. The ranch hand prepares a modest meal from a tin of beans and a strip of salted fatback. He cooks over the stove flame, stirring slowly. The aroma fills the cabin, creating a warmth that competes with the cold pressing through the log walls. He offers you a portion in a tin cup, and you eat gratefully, the salty richness settling into your stomach. Snow brushes lightly against the window. The glass fogs with your breath as you look out, catching faint outlines of trees swaying beyond the drift. The wind outside has grown mild, though the air inside still carries subtle draughts where the logs meet. You spot old cloth stuffed into several gaps between timbers. Surviving regional documents highlight the importance of such makeshift insulation, noting that riders often used worn shirts or saddle blankets to plug holes that the cold exploited. The ranch hand sits on the lower bunk and removes his gloves, flexing fingers stiff from the day's work. He tells you the cattle wandered farther than expected, seeking forage where the storm had not reached as deeply. His words drift slowly, shaped by exhaustion, but edged with patience. As he continues talking, he adjusts the stove vent and replaces the lid. A faint glow reflects in his eyes. He mentions that storms can trap ranch hands in these cabins for days at a time, especially when drifts block access to the main ranch. Some cabins, he says, hold enough provisions to last a week, while others offer only what a rider brings on his horse. You settle into the upper bunk when he offers it. The quilt drapes warmly across your chest, its weight heavy but comforting. The mattress beneath you shifts softly, its straw filling crackling. The warmth from the stove rises gently, reaching your feet first before drifting upward in slow, steady waves. One of the ranch hands from the neighbouring cabin enters through the back door. He shakes snow from his hat and joins the other man near the stove, sharing news about the horses and checking the woodpile. Their voices carry a rhythm born from years of weathering winters together, saying much with few words. The fire pops inside the stove, embers glow bright then dim. The room fills with a quiet intimacy. You listen to the two men speak softly, their conversation, weaving through topics of trail conditions, spring grazing, and memories of earlier blizzards. Their calm, grounded tone makes the cabin feel sturdy, even though it is small enough for your breath to touch every corner. Outside, the sky thickens again. A new wave of snow begins to fall, brushing the cabin walls with a gentle hiss. The ranch hands glance toward the window, acknowledging the shift without worry. They tuck more cloth into a drafty corner and position a saddle near the door to stop snow from blowing in through the threshold. Historical specialists examining these conditions often reach contrasting conclusions about how well line camps protected their occupants. Some point to the reliability of thick log walls, while others note reports of nights so cold that frost formed inside the bunks. Sitting here with warmth rising from the stove and cold, tapping faintly at the walls, you sense how both perspectives echo genuine experiences. You turn onto your side, tucking the quilt beneath your chin. The smell of cedar lingers faintly in the air, mixing with the warm scent of fire. The lower bunk creaks as one of the men lies down, pulling his own blanket over him. Your eyelids grow heavy. The warmth deepens. The room dims as one lamp is extinguished. Shadows settle along the log walls like gentle drapery. The stove continues to hum, pulsing steady heat that carries you towards stillness. And in this quiet line camp nestled against a frozen creek beneath a deepening night, you drift into sleep shaped by companionship's steady fire and the simple courage of those who watch over winter's wide country. You step out of the line camp at first light, the cold brushing your cheeks with a gentler hand than before. The storm has mostly passed, leaving the world blanketed in clean, untouched snow. Your steps lead you toward a distant rise where the land folds into a shallow basin. As you approach, you see dark shapes scattered across the white. Wagons. Not just one or two, but several arranged in a rough circle. Their canvas tops droop under the snow's weight, but smoke curls upward from a few small fires at the centre of the ring. You have reached a winter wagon camp, the kind formed by travelling families' freighters or migrant workers who banded together for safety during severe weather. Tonight you will learn how these groups slept inside frozen wagons and makeshift shelters, creating warmth from almost nothing. You approach the nearest wagon. Its wheels are half-buried spokes rimmed with ice. The canvas covering is patched in places, worn in others. A woman lifts the flap and invites you inside with a quick smile. You climb up carefully, brushing snow from your coat as you duck into the confined space. The air inside the wagon is warmer than you expect. A small lantern hangs from a hook on the bow frame, its flame steady and golden. The light reveals bundles of blankets, woven mats, and a crate converted into a small seat. Two children lie wrapped together beneath a heavy quilt, their breaths rising in soft rhythmic puffs. A man sits near the lantern, rubbing his hands together before reaching for a heated stone wrapped in cloth. He places it at the foot of the children's bedding, adjusting it gently to avoid burning the fabric. Records preserved in local collections highlight how essential these heated stones were during winter travel, often serving as the only reliable warmth through long, frigid nights. You sit on a folded blanket as the woman hands you a small cup of warm broth. A taste of root vegetables and a hint of something sweet. The warmth spreads down your throat in slow, soothing waves. As you drink, you notice a curious detail along the wagon's canvas wall. Someone has stitched a narrow strip of fur along one seam. A notable but seldom discussed custom found in marginal notes features similar modifications. Families sometimes sewed extra fur or cloth into wagon seams to reduce wind seepage, a tiny but clever adaptation that helped hold warmth inside these cramped shelters. The man adjusts the lantern wick, lowering the flame to conserve fuel. Soft light ripples along the canvas roof. Outside, voices rise from the centre of the wagon circle, where other families tend to their evening tasks. You hear someone splitting a log, someone laughing softly, someone humming an old tune. When the family invites you to join them by the shared fire, you follow them outside. The fire crackles in a shallow pit surrounded by stones. People sit on upturned barrels and crates wrapped in quilts and blankets. A pot of stew simmers above the flames, sending rich aromas into the frosty air. Children run between wagons, their cheeks flushed with cold excitement. You take your place near the fire. The warmth reaches your boots, first rising in subtle waves. A man stirring the stew tells you they became stranded when the storm overtook their caravan 2 days earlier. His voice carries the grit of someone used to winter's unpredictability. He explains they will remain here until the trail's clear enough for safe travel. A young woman nearby unrolls a thick buffalo robe and spreads it on the ground for sleeping later. She shows you how she layers woven mats beneath it to keep the cold earth from leaching warmth away. Multiple observer testimonies from that season strongly affirm that travellers depended heavily on such layering techniques, stacking whatever materials they could find to create a barrier between themselves and the frozen ground. As the fire brightens, the group begins preparing for night. Some families carry lanterns back to their wagons. Others unroll mats around the fire itself, planning to sleep outside, under canvas lean-tos angled against wagons for support. One man explains that sleeping by the fire requires constant vigilance since embers can drift. Another mentions that winds can change without warning. Their calm discussion hints at deep experience shaped by countless winter travels. A woman across the fire reaches into her pouch and pulls out a handful of crushed mint leaves. She sprinkles them into a cup of hot water. The aroma spreads in the air. She smiles and tells you the scent keeps her calm during storms. Recent studies reveal that experts remain divided regarding how much of these herbal practices carried practical benefit and how much offered comfort through ritual. Listening now, the fragrance certainly feels soothing. The fire flickers lower as evening settles fully. People drift toward their wagons, each carrying blankets, stones, lanterns, or food bundles. You return with the family who welcomed you earlier. They guide you into their wagon again, making space among the layered mats. The children sleep soundly, the heated stone near their feet still warm. You lie down on a mat at the far end, pulling a thick quilt to your chin. The canvas roof curves gently above you, glowing faintly from lantern light. Your body warms the quilt, slowly creating a small nest of heat. The wagon sways slightly as wind brushes against its side. Outside, the fire snaps. A few voices linger, murmuring through the night air. A dog barks once, then quiets. Hoofbeats shuffle softly as the livestock shift in their makeshift corral. The wagon creaks now and then, its wooden ribs adjusting to the cold. Inside your quilt, warmth deepens. The air smells of fabric softened by time, dried herbs, and faint lamp oil. Your eyelids lower. You hear the tiny exhale of the children's breaths, the soft rustle of the parents settling into their own bedding. The lantern dims, casting gentle shadows along the curves of the canvas. Your breathing steadies, your hands relax. Your body sinks into the layers beneath you, and in this small travelling home shaped by wheels, canvas, and quiet resilience, you drift into a steady, peaceful sleep held by firelight blankets and the determined warmth of those who share the winter road with you. The night grows softer now. The storms you've crossed fade into a distant hush, like memories being slowly tucked beneath a warm quilt. Your breathing steadies as the world around you loosens its grip, settling into gentler rhythms. The wagon's quiet creak becomes almost musical, swaying with the kind of patience only winter can teach. Every sound that reaches you now arrives softened, rounded, harmless. A whisper of wind, a faint shifting of blankets, a low murmur from someone already deep in dream. Feel the warmth at your feet. Let it drift upwards, slow and unhurried. Let your shoulders release the last of their tension. There is nothing to carry here, nothing to brace against, just the easy glow of lantern light fading into the soft darkness, guiding you toward calm. The cold outside loses its edge, becoming something distant, almost thoughtful. You are wrapped safely in layers of wool and quiet companionship. The canvas above you holds steady, shaped gently by the breeze. The blankets grow heavier in the most comforting way, and your breath moves in long, slow arcs that melt into the night. Your thoughts can quiet now. They can slow. You've walked through snowfields, travelled in wagons, shelters, lodges and cabins, and now you're here at the end of it all. Warm, held, safe. The winter world outside may continue its ancient wandering, but you are sheltered within a small circle of light where nothing needs your attention anymore. Let your eyes soften. Let your breath deepen. Let the stillness gather around you like soft fur. You're ready to rest. Sleep well now, drifting gently, lightly, as the night folds itself around you.